don't we go ahead and get started? Why don't we start with roll call? AC, you want to start?
Commissioner Johnston, present.
Commissioner Scharf, present.
Vice Chair Forcell, present.
Commissioner Jackson, present.
Commissioner Siegel, present.
Commissioner Smith, present.
Let's see, I don't have any comment cards. Are there members of the public that want to address the commission on any subjects not on the agenda? All right, then let's move forward. The minutes.
I'll move approval.
I actually have a change I'd like to make. On the very last page, where it says Vice Chair Forcell requested staff schedule tours of facilities for commissions, I was trying to be very careful not to ask staff to do more stuff. So I'd love if it could reflect that I expressed interest in visiting CPAU facilities at some point, wondered if other commissioners shared my interest, and that Dean Batchelor offered to notify commissioners if there were future opportunities to join an existing tour. I do, in fact.
Where was that?
The very end of the minutes. It was the very last part of the meeting when we were talking about any new topics.
Item 5.
Oh, there it is, okay.
Yep.
I also have an inquiry on that exact same topic. This is this water, selling our refuse water. There was the last paragraph, or the third to the last paragraph, talked about a continued discussion in October. I noticed it's not on the agenda this evening. Is that in schedule, or are we moving, we're letting this go and we're going straight to council?
So the thought process is that we were going to bring it back depending on what came out of the study session with council at that period of time. And there was a good conversation between staff and council at that period of time. And the thought is that it would suffice, and there would be going to council later portion in November to have more conversation with council.
On the other hand, the minutes should reflect what happened at the last meeting.
Right.
So that wasn't a change to the minutes, right?
Sorry. Somewhat of a change, yes. Thank you.
So do you want to move a specific change to the minutes?
No, I don't think it's necessary to change the minutes. I think it's reflective, and my question was answered, and I think we resolved that we would be moving forward anyways.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll move that we approve the minutes with my amendment.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, so looking at the agenda we have tonight, 4 items, or five really, including the selection of topics for the future. I had a call with Dean and Jonathan. We felt pretty good about the agenda. Are there any suggested revisions? Great, then I think we'll stick with our plan. Are there any reports from commissioners attending meetings or events?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I attended the NCPA annual conference up in Tahoe, and it was actually really interesting. There were a lot of great speakers. Some of the takeaways were that on wildfire risk, the legislator is clearly not going to act on the inverse condemnation issue. They're going to leave things the way they are. I think we're going to continue to have rolling blackouts. I don't know if they're rolling blackouts, but blackouts when we have possible wildfire events. There was also an interesting discussion on that the risks to the intermittent risks that renewable solar and wind pose actually, and the growth of distributed generation combined with the planned retirement of baseload facilities pose to the ability of CAISO to run the grid. That was a really interesting discussion. And there was also a really good, interesting discussion on transparency and cost effectiveness in transmission. The basics of that was that the investor-owned utilities are investing billions of dollars in transmission without any transparency or adequate oversight, and that it's not clear if the costs are warranted or that the projects are, on time or on budget, or the overruns there's any oversight at all on any of that. And the reason is the IOUs are just guaranteed a rate of return on it, so they have a strong incentive to build as much transmission as possible. And any attempts at reform in this area seem to be stymied by the entrenched interests around building those projects. So I thought that was really unfortunate. And, the speaker was basically arguing that we need much more transparency and much more competition in the area.
Does the California PUC not have any jurisdiction over transmission?
I don't believe they do. I think that was really the issue, is that there's all these projects that the investor-owned utilities just embark on that no one has oversight on, and they just choose to do it, whether it's warranted or not, because they get, actually, I don't remember if it's what.
Is it the FERC?
No, FERC's national.
Right, but don't they oversee transmission because it crosses state?
They do oversee transmission. That is correct. Yes. In fact, when we were in Washington, FERC was actually concerned by, do you remember the amount that they were asking for their guaranteed rate of return? It was above, it was 16 or 17. I didn't want to say it if I was wrong, because I think they're currently getting, 12 or 14?
That's right about right, yeah.
Right, and so they get 12 or 14 on any billion, or anything they invest, and so it's a great deal, and no one oversees it, you just build transmission. And one of the other discussions we came over it is that PG&E actually wants to, at this point, sort of just be a distribution company, because then you can just get your 14% return, right, and move on. Anyway, I took enough time.
Thank you. Any other reports from meetings or events? All right, let's move on to the general manager report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Filsuf. Evening, Commissioners. So I have a couple topics here to talk a little bit about. The first one is a little bit around the recycling water study that Commissioner Smith was just asking about. So on September 23rd, the Council held a study session about water reuse, opportunities for the Regional Water Quality Control Plant and the potential regional treatment wastewater transfer from the plant to the valley water. Several members of the public spoke. Some expressed desire for environmental benefits and results of the agreements for the water reuse project. Council generally indicated support for the transfer and the agreement, which included the valley water payment of $1 million a year and $60 million for the local salt removal facility to be improved in recycled quality, which will be used in Palo Alto and Mountain View for landscaping, irrigation, toilet flushing. The agreement is scheduled to go to Council back on November the 18th, and the consultant report will return to the UAC back in sometime in January, we're thinking, back to the UAC in 2020, and then back to Council for acceptances back in February of 2020, sorry. So it will come back, have another discussion about this item. A white paper on impact on building electrification on the California gas systems. So over this past summer, utility staff participated in a work group to talk through building electrification and impacts on the California gas systems, including how to mitigate those impacts. Participate in including representatives from key consumers, labor, utilities, environmental organizations. The groups were hosted by GridWorks, which is a nonprofit organization that works to convey education, empowering stakeholders to decarbonation of electric grids. GridWorks released a white paper this summer, and the findings will be emailed to the commissioners once it's available. The essential points in the paper is that California does not carefully manage the transition towards delivering less gas, and there will be unacceptable customer impacts. However, the paper lists strategies and mitigations to those impacts. And then later tonight, we'll have a little bit of a conversation around the proposed discussion around the energy reach codes. So that's an item that we'll talk a little bit more about, and we'll get a little bit more into detail about that. HP solar ribbon cutting. So the city and HP hosted a ribbon cutting ceremony earlier this month to celebrate a comp of new solar array project on the company's Palo Alto campus this month. The project combines rooftop carport solar photovoltaic systems, which projects to be about 2,350 megawatts an hour of energy, which is equivalent to about 263 average Palo Alto homes each year. HP is selling the electric back to us from the CPAU through the Palo Alto Clean feed-in tariff program, and the project's now the largest of the 6 solar projects participating in the Clean program. You probably received notice this last week that there was a safety power shutoff notice that went out. So last week, as a safety precaution, PG&E issued a notice of a potential public safety power shutoff for a large area in California due to the gusty wind conditions and high temperatures. While this ultimately did not impact the city, the staff still wanted to share the message to the community members and helping them to prepare for the potential power outages. We received that notice about 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning. As you saw, as the notification went out, it was through Monday through Wednesday of last week. Again, we didn't have any shutoffs in the Bay Area. There was some shutoffs in northern, and then also kind of the northern east side, going up Highway 5 up through Auburn in that area where they were shut off anywhere from 5 to 6 hours at a period of time. But again, we wanted to get the message out to make sure that our residents and our commercial accounts were going to be, if they were going to be affected, that they would take some type of action. So again, it was mostly precaution, and that's when we pretty much set that message up. It was more of a precautionary than it was really going to happen. But of course, if something would have happened over that, we knew, as soon as we knew, we would have put something else back out. Also, too, is at the September 16th council meeting, as most of you remember, is that there was, report went to amending Rule 20, allowing underground neighborhoods to be self-funded, which this was mostly around the Green Acres folks. It was passed by council. There were folks from Green Acres that spoke at the council meeting. And so our next steps at this period of time is that since we took advice from the Green Acres folks, we pulled the rules and regs out of going to council the week prior. There was feelings from the homeowners that there was language in some of the rules that talked about substructure equipment, so we decided to pull that. We're planning on going back in November back to council with all the rule changes that you saw some time ago. So we have, I don't know, there's about 15 rules that we were taking at that period of time that we upgraded at that point. So Rule 20, with the new language that talks about the funding aspects of it, we did increase the timeframes that you asked for notification as well as for collection timeframes. So we took that in consideration. We made sure that we upped those. And so our next steps will be is once the rules are adopted, even though Rule 20 was adopted that night, we probably could move forward, but we felt that Rule 3 has some language in underground subsurface equipment that we thought the best thing to do is to go to the council. It'll be on a consent item when it goes to council. If council approves the rule changes, then at that point we will have conversations and start the clock with the folks in Green Acres for talking to them about this whole funding issue that they could work through at that period of time.
And so it sounds like it's not going to come to the UAC again at this point?
No, it was approved. Again, like I said, we took your comments and mostly, like I said, we embedded those back into the comments and also into the rules as well when we did it.
And so is the current policy one, or the one on the table where they sort of, the utility doesn't take responsibility for who in the neighborhood pays for what? It's still just the neighborhood raises the funds,
Yes.
however they, using whatever mechanism they come up with?
Yeah,
And then it's
so-
just all about the timetable of when they pay what amount
Right.
to move forward? Okay.
So they'll have to collect all the monies before the project starts at that period of time. We did not, put this into an assessment district, so where everybody would have to pay then an X amount of fair share amongst all 100 customers. We left it up to the customers. And moving forward, there's still 8 different locations, neighborhoods throughout the city that have underground facilities. So these rules will also be giving them the opportunity that if they want to stay underground and not go to the pad-mounted transformers, that they will have that option as well with that. One of the things that Councilmember Du Bois asked in that question, in the conversation, was to add heavier language around camouflaging the transformers. He wanted to, we talked about that, it's something we do all the time, but he wanted to go on record, so we actually added that into Rule 3. So there is actually language in there now that says that the utilities will, work with the residents in a neighborhood like this to look at finding secluded areas and then also work on their landscape as well as working on camouflaging these boxes. So we put that language in there as well.
Was there also any mechanism before the payment to get a certain threshold of consent from the district before you get to the payment mechanism, and what was that percentage?
So we left that percentage at 60%. So 60% of the residents will have to vote yes for this funding portion of it, and then at that point, it'll be up to them then to collect if they get 60% of the vote throughout the neighborhood. And we're talking about 100 customers that would be impacted in this underground district.
Thanks for reporting back on that. As you know, we did spend a lot of time
Yes.
discussing it here, so it's great to find out how it all is progressing.
Great. I'll, next time, I'll probably just give an update on the rule work too, because like I said, it's going to go on the consent calendar. Council could adopt it if they would like to pull it and put it as an action item, though we would have to talk about it. But I'll give an update as soon as I find out what we're going to do with that. A little bit of participations, events that that utilities took on this last month. So there was a Midtown Ice Cream Social on September 15th, some EV Technical Assistant Program soft launch on a workshop that was done on September the 18th, Sunshare Workshop on the 21st of September, and then we did Emergency Preparedness Event and EV Drive and Ateria Driving National Drive Week on September the 22nd on both of those. Some upcoming events to mark your calendars on is that on Bay Area Home Efficiency Expo. So we're going to have the first expo that we are going to be involved with. So there are 2 dates. There's Thursday, October the 10th from 2 to 7 at the Mitchell Park. Again, this is the first of its kind. It's free to the public. Event for homeowners and renters and building professionals to attend, to hear from experts and important of switching fossil fuels to help California reach its climate goals. And manufacturer representatives will be there as well. There will be some electric cooktop that people will get a chance to take a look at. And then that also repeats on Saturday the 12th from 10 to 4 at the Tech Interactive area in San Jose. So again, the first one's going to be at Mitchell Park on the 10th, which is the Thursday from 2 to 7. And then it'll move to Saturday the 12th from 10 to 4 to San Jose. So if anybody's interested, it'll be the first of our expos that we've done. And that pretty much concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Do we have any commissioner comments?
I have a question. I think the last month you mentioned that the RFP or what's going out on the AMI fiber, maybe? The question is, has it gone out? And I believe you said after it went out that there would be some communication.
So I did find out that the RFP actually went out this past Friday, so I need to send you the actual RFP. And that was one of the things I should have brought up, is that it did go out, and it's open for a month period of time, but I will make sure that I send you all the actual RFP that was sent out to the public at that point.
Thank you.
All right, then we will turn to, well, we don't have any unfinished business, so we will turn to our new business. Discussion of sea level rise adaptation strategy. I still don't have any public comment cards. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to speak on this topic? Doesn't sound like it, so I'll turn it over to staff.
Uh-oh. Okay, there it is. Good evening, Commissioners. Jonathan Abenshine, Assistant Director of Utility Resource Management. This item is coming to you based on a Commissioner request at a meeting earlier this year, and I believe the interest was specifically in what the city was doing to prepare for sea level rise and how that would impact utility assets. Now, we're still at the very beginning stages of planning for sea level rise, but Julie Weiss from our Public Works Watershed Protection Team has already done a lot of work on getting efforts started across the city, and she and the city's consultant, Jeremy Lowe, are going to share with you a presentation that she's shared previously with the City Council. This is mostly a briefing for the UAC, but we'd welcome any feedback that you have about specific utility-related concerns that you want us to make sure we look into as we start doing more detailed assessments in the coming years here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Julie.
All right, good evening. I'm Julie Weiss. I'm our Policy and Public Education Manager for Public Works Watershed Protection. And I just want to start by saying thank you for your proactive interest in this topic. It is certainly going to be a topic that we discuss more frequently and more in depth in the decades to come. Tonight's presentation is really going to be broken into two pieces, and we thought it would be most helpful if we could give you a big picture overview of what sea level rise means for San Francisco Bay and what agencies in our greater area are already doing to prepare for that. And for that, we have brought in Jeremy Lowe, who is a subject matter expert and one of the leading experts really on sea level rise in the Bay Area, and I will introduce him properly in a moment. And then after he gives his overview, I will zoom in to how Palo Alto is preparing. So I like to start with the first slide. This is a photograph I took just after Christmas in January that shows a pretty typical king tide. Those are the highest tides that we get usually in December and January of each year. And it's common to see our trails submerged, and when you're out there on a day like that, to see water starting to creep towards the road. It's difficult to get into some of the buildings out there. There's a couple thousand sandbags each year around the interpretive center so that the levee isn't overtopped. But those inconveniences aren't a big deal because they just last for a few days. But this scenario here could be a near daily occurrence in just a few decades. And that could become even more dramatic as we know that sea level rise heights are going to be increasing decades after that. So that is just a picture for you to be considering. I want to introduce Jeremy to give you that big picture overview that we talked about. Jeremy Lowe is a senior scientist with the San Francisco Estuary Institute, where he leads initiatives related to rising ocean levels due to climate change. Jeremy has 30 years of experience in tidal wetland restoration and sea level rise adaptation planning on the Pacific coast and in Europe. And some of his career highlights include designing sea defenses to reduce flooding in Venice, Italy, authoring tidal wetland guidelines for San Francisco Bay and Puget Sound, and he developed and directed one of the first nature-based climate adaptation projects in San Francisco Bay, which he will show you in his presentation. Born in Britain, Jeremy also worked at the universities of Cambridge and Newcastle in England.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Commissioners, for inviting us to speak to you about this important subject. The title is Adaptation, but to understand what we need to adapt to, we need to understand what the hazard is as well. So I'm going to briefly explain to you about the issues we have with sea level rise. Sea level rise is driven by the warming of the general atmosphere of the planet, which is well documented. And that heating is also occurring in the ocean. And as you heat water, it expands. And as the oceans heat up, the sea level rises. That's a slow and very predictable amount of change. The more uncertainty is related to the ice on land melting. And when the ice melts and goes into the ocean, it rapidly raises the ocean levels. And that gives us uncertainty in what the future will be. However, we do know that sea level is rising. We've been measuring it for a long time, and the projections all show those changes are following the models. The observations are following the models. The other thing that we have to bear in mind is the Earth is moving up and down. As we know in the Bay, we have tectonic events. And that does, and also because we live close to the Bay and there's a lot of Bay mud around, we can have a considerable amount of changes in the surface of the Bay, the surface of the ground. So we have to take into account the Earth moving, the water moving, and that relative change is what we're really trying to manage. Luckily in the Bay, we have some really good records. From 1850, they put tide gauges in the Bay, and from 1890, which this graph shows, we have a considerable amount of information. So this is a graph on the bottom is showing 1890 to 2090, 200 years worth of information of 100 years which we've actually observed. And on the vertical axis, we have the amount of sea level rise from relative to 2000. And what you can see is the black squiggly line is what we've observed in the Bay. And it shows a general trend upwards. It shows a lot of spikes, which are storm surges, El Niños, particular events. But there's a general trend of about 7 inches per century in that line. The dotted line are some of the projections that we see. And what the difference is, the dotted line is smooth because we can't really predict all those variability in it, but we can show the general trend. The fact there are 2 lines is important, and there's probably a lot more than 2 lines, is that these are the uncertainties. Part of the uncertainty is how we model this. Another uncertainty is the physics of what happens in Antarctica. Does a major ice sheet break now or in 2 decades' time, and so on. So there's some timing. Another uncertainty is our emissions, is how much we put up into the atmosphere, so how we mitigate the longer term, because adaptation has to go with mitigation. You don't have to crunch all the numbers. Each community doesn't have to do their own job. The state has been doing it for us. They provide guidance on how to interpret the scientific projections and how to incorporate those into planning and policy. So the state, this is a 2018 update. It's been updated. There was previously it was 2015 and 2011. So it's going to be a regular update, and that will continue as the science improves. But also, because of this uncertainty, we're always going to have to continue to do forward projections. So expect to see this as a changing target. Take-homes, really, as I said, 0.6, about 7 inches of sea level rise over the last century. Expect about 1.92 feet up by 2050. That's a global level. It's going to happen. It happens in that jaggedy shape of the curve, so it's not going to happen immediately, but it's going to happen over the long-term trend. So that's up to your knee. Between 5 and 7 feet by 2100. That's what BCDC, that's what the state agencies are planning for. Hopefully it'll be less. It could be more. The likely band is 5 to 7. There's an outside chance of 10 feet. As I said, there's a lot of uncertainty looking forward. Depends what we do, depends what the natural system does. But you can think beyond 2100 as well, because it doesn't stop at the end of the graph. The projections continue to go up. What's protecting us? Well, this is a nice day. This is actually the East Bay, Hayward, Bay Trail, typical kind of going along there on your bike, mud flats outside, still water level, still levels on the water, and a pond behind you, and typical bay scene. What we're really interested in, that would be the still water level, just the mean sea level. This is what this is the same picture, and this is a king tide, but also a storm surge, some waves on top of it. This is what we're really trying to manage for, are these events where we have water coming into over the tops of the levees. It can damage the levees and breach them, causes, if nothing else, when the water goes away, we have to go out and fix the levee to make it good for the next time. So managing these types of events, people talk about these in recurrence intervals. This may be a 1 in 5 year event or a 1 in 10 year event. So not too big, but enough to cause some problems. The problem is with sea level rise, the size of these events increases and they're going to become more frequent. And to try and illustrate that, this is, again, the same graph I showed before. It's got 200 years on the bottom. It's got the amount of sea level rise in inches on the vertical axis. The squiggly line I showed you before, which was measured at San Francisco over the last 100 years, is at the bottom. That's the mean sea level. However, with the tide and with storms, we get a more extreme high tides, and we get storm surges on top of that. So those crosses over there are the monthly maximum water surface elevations that we've had over that last 100 years. The projection for the stillwater level, we can manage that. That's just with the stillwater level. At the same time, those extremes are going to increase. So our monthly extreme is going to increase with sea level rise. The same with our 2 monthly, our 1 year, and our 10-year extreme storms. So those are the ones that we actually manage for. When we're designing a levee, we're designing for a certain level of protection. That level of protection is going to change over time. So if we then build our house or our levee or something to a specific height today, in the future, in 20 years' time, what protected from a 100-year event may protect from a 50-year event. And by 40 years' time, it'll be down to 20-year event. So the level of risk that you have for assets behind the levee is going to increase. Even if everything else, if the levee stays where it is and if everything else is stationary, the sea level is changing and that risk is increasing. It's not just the bay that water comes from. We have a lot of creeks coming through from the watersheds. This is Martinez. This is in the North Bay. And this is an example from 2005 from the same New Year's event. This is Alhambra Creek, came over its banks. The reason why it came over its banks because we had a higher elevation in the bay and the water coming down the creek, couldn't get out into the bay, so it broke its banks and went out into the city. So as sea level rises, we're going to see that happening more. And so that takes the hazard of sea level rise back into the cities. These are all hazards we face at the moment, but they're going to become more frequent, and they're going to become, the depths of flooding is going to become greater, and we're going to have to manage those because the depth sets how much damage we're going to get. So we have a litany of impacts potentially. Sea level rise, increased storminess. There's discussion. There's work looking at how winds patterns are going to change over the Pacific and how that may bring in larger atmospheric rivers and so on. Rainfall intensity will increase, may increase, and so we need to think about how our existing systems will cope with that. Because we've urbanized a lot of our watersheds, that increasing rainfall is discharged to the bay more rapidly, so we've got to think about river discharges. As I mentioned, the land is subsiding in many places, particularly in the bay areas, which we've diked off. We have erosion of some of our marshes, and we have marsh accretion as sediment gets in. So we have a changing dynamic landscape. We have groundwater changes as well. As sea level rises, the water within the ground can rise as well. There's not a complete one-to-one relationship, but the concern of flooding during groundwater away from behind the levees, underneath, can affect underground utilities and because there's increased buoyancy of pipes and corrosion, as well as surface flooding. So there's a number of different things. And when we're thinking about that, we also got to think about, we're also putting new assets in these areas where this is many of the baylands are part of the economic engine of the bay. So our level of protection that we're providing has to account for not just the hazard on the outside, but also the assets you're protecting on the inside. So there's lots of thought being put into this about how we might address this. We have levees around the bay. They do a great job. Flood control districts, you don't often read of issues of flooding. That's good because they're doing their job. But the issues they're having to deal with are going to change. So we're thinking also about the fact that we're blessed with a large amount of marshes around the bay and natural systems, which the Bay Area has invested in and has voted to tax themselves to continue to invest in. Marrying those up, there's potential to use natural systems in many places to augment the built environment. And so we can have these hybrid pieces. And so one idea is the horizontal levee, where we're combining the built structure with a marsh and with a gentle slope between the marsh and the levee to provide more habitat, upland habitat adjacent to marshes to make better marshes, but also to provide better flood risk management in those areas as well, and to provide more adaptation to sea level rise. And so there's a pilot of that at Oraloma on the East Bay, where people are trying that out, not just for Oraloma, but in Hayward, but also to benefit the region, so we can learn from these experiments. There's other experiments being done on marshes and on beaches and on reefs. So a lot to learn for Palo Alto. And thinking about that and applying it, this is a picture of Palo Alto looking north along the marshes to East Palo Alto across the airfield and the yacht basin. There is a project there, the SAFER project, which Julie will be talking about, where there's a plan to build a better flood risk management levee along there, but incorporating features, natural features into that to provide more benefit to the environment, but to make it more cost effective and more adaptable in the longer term. As I mentioned, there's other examples of reefs and oyster reefs, which have been tried in the North Bay. There are examples of beaches being tried. They're not applicable to everywhere. The bay is quite varied, but there are opportunities to try out these enhancements to the natural environment that could also benefit us for sea level rise. And looking south from Palo Alto, now this is looking over the flood basin and towards Mountain View. There you have a great opportunity, because that's where the South Bay Salt Pond Project is doing a large amount of restorations in place, which will provide a big buffer between the bay and the levees. It's also the site of the shoreline study, which the Corps of Engineers and Valley Water and the communities along in this area are all looking at that longer-term levee approach to flood risk management. These are big projects, for big projects and also over a long time. We're talking the graphs I was showing for a century, and the projects are in the billions. We have to think about how we're going to manage this over time. And so one way that people think about this is through adaptation pathways. And so this is a graph. This is like a timeline, but instead of time, I have elevation of the sea level. So this is the amount of sea level rise. Because of the uncertainty, we don't know the date something's going to happen, but we know roughly when elevations might happen. So today, that existing marsh, it can probably accommodate, say, 9 inches of sea level rise. So in that gray area, it's being effective. But at some point, it starts to have issues, or the levee starts having issues. We need to do something else. So we plan a second intervention. We say, well, maybe we need to put some beaches in, and we need to make some other changes. It's effective from 9 inches or so, but getting permits and raising revenue and funding for this and planning takes time. So we need to start thinking some time before we hit that threshold to actually make a decision about what we'd like to do. And that continues. Nothing is, as I said, the sea level rise continues to rise rapidly. We're going to have to go into Plan B and Plan C. Plan C, maybe those horizontal levees. Again, we haven't built many of those, so we've got to take a longer time thinking those through. They could last longer. So gradually we build up and adapting a shoreline, but thinking ahead what that adaptation is so we don't put ourselves into a blind corner, that we think through the whole plan. But with sea level rise continuing to rise, there is the question about how long we can maintain any of these existing lines, and that's a bigger societal discussion about where those assets are, and that includes communities. How close can they be to the bay, and what their relationship to the bay will be in the longer term. We can't defend everywhere with a finite amount of resources. We have to think about what that really long-term future might look like. And that's why you need a plan and policy, which what Julie is going to be speaking about.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. So as you probably already know, climate protection is one of Council's top 4 priorities. And a couple of years ago, staff was directed to put together a sea level rise policy, which would inform the development of a sea level rise adaptation plan. Our policy was approved by Council earlier this year, and we are currently underway to get what we need in place to start putting together that plan. Really, the needs for the policy is it bridges those high-level goals that we have in things like the comp plan and our sustainability climate action plan, with what we're actually going to be doing on the ground. And we need to have that policy to kind of unify and guide all of staff's efforts there. But we are not starting from scratch, although we just got our policy off the ground. There are several projects and plans underway. And I'm going to just touch on these. I'm going to give you the elevator pitch version of all of these projects, all of which are really interesting. But I'm just going to give you the Cliff Note version of these tonight. And then if you want additional information, we will send those to you after this evening's presentation. So one of the projects that you probably heard about last December was the completion of the San Francisco Creek project, which adapted and changed where San Francisco Creek enters the bay so that it was wider and it could accommodate one of those 100-year floods. And the big green wall there is a flood wall, which also protects the community just north of that creek from up to 3 feet of sea level rise. So that was one of the most recent projects. And that project will tie in with the Safer Bay project that Jeremy discussed about. All these different colored lines are proposed levee alignments. A feasibility study was recently completed, and our Public Works engineering staff will be bringing that feasibility study and those alignments to council to see which alignment they prefer. That will be happening in the year ahead. And in one of those sections of the proposed in any of those proposed levee alignments, a horizontal levee is in the works. And this horizontal levee, that's that sloped planted area that Jeremy discussed a few moments ago. This is currently, we've got a preliminary plan for this, and the current thoughts are that it would be sited at the east end of Embarcadero Road, which is a great spot because that's an area where there's some degraded habitat and could really enhance the habitat in that area, as well as provide for up to about 2 feet of sea level rise protection. And again, that would be coordinated with the development and the planning of those more traditional levee alignments. Our Community Services Division has also completed a vulnerability assessment for how sea level rise will actually impact the baylands habitat. And the key takeaways from that were that about 12 inches is when we would see a lot of that habitat submerged, and that approximates that photograph that I showed you at the very beginning, so that's what it would look like. And 36 inches is when we really started having bigger concerns because bay water could move inland and impact our utilities, our wastewater treatment plant, the utilities that you guys typically think about as well, our airport, and some of our recreational facilities. We do have some projects that are already adapting to sea level rise. The Palo Alto Flood Basin Tide Gate is in need of repair. Those repairs are going to be happening over the next 3 years, and they, when it's completed, it will be adaptable again to future levee improvements. So we are adapting. This is an aerial view of a proposed secondary outfall of second pipe for our wastewater treatment plant. If you look down here where my cursor is, this is the wastewater treatment plant. This red line is the existing pipe that carries our treated effluent out to the bay, which is near an area near the interpretive center. This is what it looks like when you're standing next to it. And starting next fall, we're going to be building a new outfall pipe, a secondary outfall pipe that would help our plant accommodate for higher amounts of water coming through the plant, but also it will be designed to withstand 3 feet of sea level rise. And you can imagine as sea level rise increases, it maybe moves up the pipe and it's hard to get our effluent out. So that's the adaptation that's in the works for wastewater treatment. As Jeremy discussed, we have to think also about the upper portion of our watershed. What about the water that's coming down to the sea level rise inundation area? Our council recently approved a green stormwater infrastructure plan, and the idea behind green stormwater infrastructure is how do we reimagine how we design our cities so that our streets and our curbs can mimic nature and slow spread and sink water, and so that reduces that fast runoff going down to the edge of the bay, and you will be hearing more about this likely in the future, but we will be putting plans into place to change how we design our streets to slow that stormwater. So if we're doing all this work, why do we need to have a policy and an additional plan? It seems like we're doing a lot, and the answer is because we need to do more, and greenhouse gas emissions are not going in the right direction for us globally, and that has a direct impact in the amount of sea level rise that we could anticipate. So what does that mean for us here in Palo Alto? Again, think about that image I showed at the very beginning. Around mid-century, we're looking at somewhere around 1 foot of sea level rise, looking at the most probable sea level rise predictions, and that's what it looks like on this map. But then it gets really interesting if we are to not take any action at that 3 foot plus sea level rise around the turn of the century. And again, this is, if we were to not take action, we could see the bay encroaching even up past Highway 101. And it could look even more dramatic depending on what happens with those Antarctic ice sheets and increasing sea levels there. Another thing we need to be thinking about is how sea level rise impacts groundwater. This is a slide that was put together by a researcher at UC Berkeley, and it shows the depths from the surface to groundwater, and the red is the groundwater that's closest to the surface. And in coming decades, we could see a lot more red on this slide. We'll see that groundwater rise, and one of the data gaps we need to fill, and we're going to be working on filling it in the year ahead, is what does that really mean on a granular level for Palo Alto? And furthermore, what do we do about it? Groundwater rises, how do we deal with that? And so that is one of the things we'll be looking at in the year ahead. And of course, how does all this impact utilities? Because in addition to, of course, the above ground utilities and the Colorado substation, which I know are key, what about all the underground utilities and the impacts from buoyancy and corrosion that Jeremy discussed? So this is where our policy enters in, because there's a lot of work to do, and our work across departments who are working on these projects needs to be in sync and needs to be coordinated, and our policy seeks to try to make sure that we're going to be doing that. So the number one goal is to keep doing whatever we can to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. After the start of the new year, we will be starting on a vulnerability assessment to answer some of these questions about groundwater and what do all these things really mean for utilities and our city in general, and how do we put together a plan for that. Some of the plan actions could include things like changing our design standards for buildings in the flood level or in the flood zone and sea level rise inundation area. Looking at sea level rise triggers for action for our CIP projects. Looking at how do we educate the public about sea level rise and what it means for them, especially if they're in an area that might be impacted by insurance rates increasing. So our policy was vetted thoroughly by scientists such as Jeffrey in the area, by our colleagues and other agencies on either side of our border, and people who are even further down the road for planning than we are. And we had a very successful public meeting where the public had a chance to weigh in. This was back in March. We had about 70 or 80 people attend. And so our policy and our efforts are really, we're doing our best to really be informed by the best thinking and by what we know our public cares about as well. So our next steps are, again, we've got an RFP out right now. Our goal is to get that contract in place by January so we can start that vulnerability assessment, start answering some of the questions that we have, and start putting together a plan that we could also share with our various commissions and council. We have been asked to return to City Council with at least a draft plan or an update by the end of next year. At some point thereafter, it would be finalized, we'd begin implementing it, and it would become a chapter of our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, and we would be updating that about every 5 years, along with the rest of the SCAP as well. So that is our update for now, and we would love to answer any questions that you have.
Commissioners? Any questions?
So, I mean, this seems like an overwhelming problem. I mean, obviously, it's doesn't just affect Palo Alto. It's a whole regional, national, worldwide problem. But for us, we need to start somewhere in terms of addressing this, and you're already doing some things, and maybe we have to wait for the vulnerability assessment. But what I would be interested in is, what do you think are the top priorities that Palo Alto, and particularly the utilities, need to be looking at in terms of protecting us from the inevitable?
Well, I'm really interested in seeing how that report shakes out as well, because these are questions that everyone around the Bay is asking. I do think that we really need to fill those data gaps that we have, because we can't plan unless we really know what we should be anticipating. But certainly we do need to get answers to what groundwater means for all those underground utilities. And we need to look to some countries who are already dealing with this before we are, to figure out what those solutions are. So I hope to be able to return to you in coming months to help answer your questions about what priorities we need to be looking at, but certainly still making forward movement on the SAFER project and some of these immediate adaptation strategies that I discussed. Do you want to add?
Go ahead, Ed.
So obviously the vulnerability study needs to be completed, but looking at other communities around the Bay and learning from them, whether they have completed some studies, you have a lot of infrastructure down by the Bay, and those large flat baylands were very attractive for placing things like wastewater facilities, which obviously have to be at the bottom of the hill. And there's quite a lot of those. They usually have a lot of underground galleries, as well as they need to pump water, and so the hydraulic gradients are going to change as well. So there's a number of different issues related to wastewater. And BACWA, who's the Bay Area Clean Water Agency, are looking at how those types of some natural adaptations may assist not just the sea level rise benefits, but also looking at wastewater polishing benefits as well, using wetlands and horizontal levees to do that work. So there is ongoing work in there. You have landfills down by the edge of the bay, and you have to maintain the integrity of those landfills. And as sea level rises, they may be subject to waves attack, and so thinking about how to manage those. And so the South Bay Salt Ponds project and the SAFER projects are both thinking about putting some slopes in front of the base of the levees to provide more habitat, but they're doing another job of providing protection. So looking for multiple benefits. It's that people can, you can imagine what's going to happen as sea level rises. We know we want to restore the wetlands. Can we restore them in a way which is also going to be beneficial in the long term to help manage the shoreline? A big issue will probably be the flood control basin. Because that is set at a certain elevation, and at the moment it collects a lot of water and provides benefits to the community behind. But as sea level rises, it's going to be more difficult to get that water back out to the bay. The low tides is going to go up, so it's not going to go by gravity, and so you're going to have to think about pumping. You're also going to have to maintain the levee around the outside of it and making sure that that's in good condition if it's going to serve its purpose. There's also a lot of underground transmission. In other places, they have wastewater and other treated water is moved around in those baylands. It's not just the pipe itself, it's the access to the pipe. And quite a lot of the vulnerabilities are being able to maintain the access to those areas. Not just the pipe's okay, but the access and the pressure relief valves are not. Pumping stations are another issue that they have certainly on the East Bay. And then there's a large number of transmission. I mean, PG&E transmission towers, you find them in every marsh. And getting to those, access to those, but then also making sure that their foundations are sensible, are good. We've built a lot in those bay, assuming there was going to be a rather stable bay. And as the bay moves, we've got to think about what are the consequences of that. And unfortunately, that means some long-term changes are going to be needed, but if we can incorporate those into capital improvement plans that we're already planning to do, when we can think cleverly about that, then it shouldn't be an emergency, it should be more of a natural evolution, and hopefully more of an evolution.
So think hard about anything we put underground, particularly the bay.
Yeah, so the map that Julie showed was a map based upon wells and where people have measured and observed the groundwater. At the end of the year, the USGS will be releasing a modeling of groundwater changes with sea level rise. So how they model how water moves through the ground, and will provide projections looking forward about groundwater impacts. But certainly, a lot of things quite a lot of underground things are not designed to be immersed in bay water for periods of time, so a change in conditions you can expect.
Thank you.
If I could just add a bit to the groundwater angle, this is Phil Boble, Public Works. So we're a little bit ahead probably in thinking more quantitatively about what the groundwater impact is going to be, in that we were doing this Northwest County strategic plan for recycled water, and one of the issues there was whether we could or should recharge the groundwater in our area with treated wastewater. Anyway, it led us to kind of the same question: is what is sea level rise going to do to groundwater? And the preliminary, and it is preliminary because we're going to do more in this area, conclusion was that, surprise, surprise, right at the interface of the bay and land, sea level rise is going to have a one-to-one correspondence with groundwater, right where they touch. You know, one goes up, the other goes up. And that impact would be sort of muted as you went west more and more, just because you've got all this soil that acts as a buffer. And in the El Camino range scale, approximately, is where you'd see the end of that impact. So in between the bay and roughly the El Camino area, you'd be seeing an impact. Well, we need to put a finer point on that, but we do have a start on it. The other thing, just in general, I wanted to make sure everybody was thinking through is that even now, as we do things like at the sewage treatment plant, for example, inside the sewage treatment plant, it's currently protected by the levee that we know is inadequate, but it raises the policy question, which we're going to have to face in this plan, is what do we assume about the current levee? What do we assume about the upgraded levee that we're planning through the SAFER project? Do we assume it fails? Or do we assume it's going to hold for the lifetime of the projects? If you assume it's going to fail, then you want to do everything like at the sewage treatment plant, pretending like the water is going to come right into the sewage treatment plant, and each feature at the sewage treatment plant would have to be designed differently. That's one assumption. Another assumption is that, no, we're going to strengthen those levees. We're going to make them really more robust, and therefore we don't have to change the design standards for all the equipment we have at the sewage treatment plant. So I just wanted to point out that that's Julie's, all of ours, kind of a major policy question that's going to hit us in the face pretty darn soon.
Sorry if I could just interject. With respect to the RFP that's going to be issued, in reading through this, the RFP is for a vulnerability assessment, is that correct?
And a sea level rise adaptation plan.
So that's the multi-year SLR implementation plan?
Yes, it would be probably for the next 5 years, and with some milestones blocked off in future decades for things like the SAFER project that we know will be starting further down the road beyond our initial five-year plan.
So apologies, I haven't been here long. The work that we've done so far, which has been fantastic, just highlighted in your presentation, how has that been tied into a plan for protection?
Well, that would be, I think, blocked off as part of the plan, but what I want to see happen is that I want to have all of these projects in one spot that a person can look at and see, this is what our plan is from year to year. Some of these projects we haven't started yet, so that would be part of that five-year plan. For example, the tide gate and some of the adaptations we were just talking about with the effluent at the plant, that doesn't start until next year. So we would be blocking off what we know is coming as part of that plan, and then also the milestones that we know that are a little bit fuzzier, but we know will be coming down the road, again, like the SAFER and the levies. Does that help? So it'll be, some of these projects that we have will be the starter for the plan, and then we'll be filling in what else do we need to do? Like, what else do we need to do for like the design
So
review
it's almost like the
process?
RFP is identifying the gaps in our strategic plan.
Yes, that is another way to think about that. And we don't really have a unified plan yet. We have a number of projects that we know are on the books, but those together don't equal a plan. And we want the plan
Great.
that
Okay.
blocks out the vision for the next several years.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, I'm wondering, as we move forward and come up with a consolidated plan, even before then, as we're upgrading underground utilities or we're doing other capital improvement projects, are we starting to take into account the information we have and the benefit of other cities' studies and information, so that what we put in today has some longevity to it, even as we're learning about more impacts from sea level rise?
I think what we have done is that, you know, we've started looking at that, especially in the water, gas, wastewater group portion of it, since most of that's where all the undergrounding portions are being taken from. And I think the thing is that we've looked at, you know, areas that have been identified that we've worked on, and I think the thing is that we have to take a harder look at what we're actually doing. Especially in the neighborhoods where we know that there's possibly strong areas of flooding, which is down, be closer down to the bay side. You know, most of the work that's being done, I'd say, with most of the utilities are above that portion of it, but that doesn't mean that that area will not flood. So it's something that we are taking a hard look at, and it's something we need to work on. We may have to look at changing design on how we go ahead and we how long, you know, how maybe we have to increase some depths, or maybe we have to look at maybe not going down that same streets portions of it. So I think that it's something that is going to have to be taken a look at.
I'd like to add to that we have started holding quarterly meetings for department across staff, and the last two that we've had have been really great, because I think it's really starting to help departments who are typically somewhat siloed just by nature of where they're located, or they're just in different departments, and they're really starting to connect and coordinate and communicate better. And part of that does involve learning, and one of the things we've talked about is how do we as staff keep getting smarter about this topic and make sure that we are communicating and do that in a thoughtful, planned way. And the first way is to make sure we're just getting in the same room and talking about our projects at least every 3 months.
So Phil, I was fascinated by what you said about, you know, do we build the levees up or do we work on the infrastructure and hardening it? I would assume it's cheaper to work on the levee, but I mean, it's not clear to me. I don't know. Do you have a sense of that? Or, I mean, it seemed like the no-brainer was to work on the levee, but I'm
Well,
curious.
I think you're right. I mean, we have to work on the levees. They were not part of the system, if you want to call it a system that we have, was really never designed to be a levee. It just happens to be the high point. The Harbor Road is the best example. Harbor Road is part of the current levee system, but it wasn't designed to be a levee, and it's the first thing that overtops on the king tides. So I think everybody that we've talked to agrees work on the levees. So yes, that's happening, and that's essential. The policy question I was framing, as you know, is, well, okay, we do that. Now, do we just depend on that? Is that our solution? Or do we say, that could fail. Look what happened in New Orleans. That could fail, and if it does, should we do other things to harden the infrastructure, including the utilities, but not just the utilities?
So before you leave, I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, it seems to me, I mean, New Orleans failed because they hadn't really patched up their levees. They left them that for, I don't know how many years. But so if we fixed our levees and we knew what they were, we'd have a pretty good sense of whether or not they'd fail. I think the question is, how much sea level rise do you get, right? And then there's the question of, is there such thing as rapid sea level rise, where suddenly it rises, in 1 year much more than we anticipate? And obviously, if it rises slowly enough, we can still continue to work on our levees. I mean, I thought you were right about, we anticipate somewhere between 12 to 18 inches by 2050, and then 3 to 4 feet by 2100. I mean, that's far enough out that I would think that we could spend the money. Because I assume there's limited resources. I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, you'd like to harden everything, right? So then the question is, in a world of limited resources, where do you get your best bang for your buck? And then the other thing I think we should think about is, when we plan on doing the horizontal leveling and these other projects, are we talking to the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority about what kind of projects we can submit to them for funding? Because, they fund things from larger project to small projects, and I mean, I think it's always worthwhile for us to be having some project in there. And the only project I know that we've ever had in there was through the San Francisco Creek, project. We haven't really put together any projects in Palo Alto to put forward to them that I know of. I mean, maybe we have since.
Well, SAFER is our first, is the example project of a levee all the way through Palo Alto versus something smaller. And I can't give you the exact status on our discussions with various funding agencies, but rest assured that we are moving ahead with that. But surprise, surprise, everybody wants to do that, around the Bay, around the nation. And so there aren't sufficient funds identified nationally or regionally or anywhere to do all the work that really needs to be done. So we have to continue to push, we have to continue to show the vulnerability of our particular area and hope to be successful with it.
But part of that is also making sure if you have a shovel-ready project, you get
Correct.
You get the funds a lot quicker than someone who has more of an idea for a project.
Correct. So we have to keep pushing to be in that line with shovel-ready projects. You're absolutely right.
And then my other question was, Hayward actually has done a lot on their shoreline with this, with, BCDC's adaptation to rising tides, right, their ART program, which I thought was fantastic. And I was wondering what opportunities are we doing to interface to do something similar maybe and get, obviously to work with BCDC on that or to get it funded and that, because I actually thought what they came out with that stuff was really interesting.
Well, Julie can probably describe better than I can the fact that we have gotten some funding for this horizontal levee she was describing. So and Hayward's kind of famous for the horizontal levee. Is that what you were thinking about? The
Yes,
Hayward?
that's correct.
Yeah. So we have gotten some funding. Do you know the details of that, Julie?
So we did get Measure A funding for part of the preliminary design for a horizontal levee, and we also have received grant funding for the next phase from Prop 1, which is also a source of funding. And just touching on what I was sensing you were asking is, what are we doing for regional coordination? So we are engaging actively with regional, and there's a lot going on regionally with these discussions, both, how do we streamline permitting? How do we get people, I'm going to a meeting tomorrow, called Charge, and it's public agencies getting together to do what you're talking about. What are you all working on? How do we align our efforts and making sure that we're all working together in sync? And there are, of course, the BCDC efforts, which are really to help fill data gaps and get people on the same page at a much higher altitude and much broader level.
So there is a BCDC permit streamlining project, the BRIC project.
BRIT.
Right,
Yes.
BRIC.
That was the permit streamlining project I was referring to.
Right.
I was trying to avoid one more acronym for you, but yes, that is the effort. And again, the idea is to get permitting agencies in the same room to review projects in advance, so when they get further down the road, when it's not a preliminary project, they have a good sense that it's going to be permitted in a more quickly than they have been in the past.
But I think the BRIT was put together already. I mean, I realize BCDC put in the funding, and I think the Bay Restoration Authority stepped up. And I mean, that's my recollection, is that most people agreed to put the funding in, right? So I think that's happened, no?
It was Measure A funds for BRIT support.
Not all of it. No, because I know BCDC put some money in.
And then the individual agencies have put a person in.
Right.
So there's the Corps of Engineers, the regional board, BCDC, Fish and Wildlife have paid, paying for a person to be in those meetings. There's regular monthly meetings about the permits, and then there's a policy committee above that discussing those bigger questions, which are always coming up in permits, to try and hit those. Can we change things? And then just to mention that tomorrow BCDC have a Bay Plan Amendment, talking about Bay fills. They're trying to think ahead about the legislation that's written in the 60s and 70s, translating it into the today and what we think are going to be the future issues. How do we rethink that the uses of that legislation?
Right, you need the bay fill so that you can have the marsh climb up as it gets flooded.
Some of the solutions that we talked about are illegal at the moment. You can't put fill in the bay, but perhaps in the future we can for good purpose.
After the Bay Plan Amendment, so
Yeah.
after tomorrow.
Yeah, after tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Any other commissioner questions? I'll limit myself to just one. So there's an RFP going out for a consultant to make an SLR vulnerability assessment and plan. I'm just curious why we need a consultant for that. Is that that staff doesn't have time and resources to spend on this, or is it that the consultant has a special expertise that we don't have in-house? And what kind of expertise, I guess, is needed for this type of assessment and plan?
Could I give that a shot, Phil Boble, Public Works? It is both, but mostly it's that staff doesn't have the ability to, or the time to kind of drop everything and turn to this. We could do it over time, but if we want to do it as rapidly as we can, best thing to do is to get a consultant. And partly that's because there's a lot of detail work in this vulnerability assessment, especially for utilities, to be honest, because you're not just looking at one facility, you're looking at a large number of small facilities that constitute our utility systems, right? And to do that rapidly and to look at all these different locations, it's going to take a lot of time. And the most efficient way to do that is with a consultant. Yeah.
And so what kind of consultant firm will typically take
Well, we
this on?
will be trying to get somebody that's done this kind of thing. I'm sorry, that was the second part of your question, the expertise part. So we will be trying to get somebody, and I don't have the details on that. I don't think Julie does probably right now either, as to exactly what the short list of consultants that would be logical to do this are. But we'll be looking to find somebody that's done this kind of thing before. Maybe they haven't done a vulnerability assessment per se, but maybe they've been looking at utility and other systems for weaknesses before. This isn't the first time something like this comes up. It's just that now we want to do it in the context of sea level rise. What we're really analyzing the systems themselves and how vulnerable they are. I don't know, do you utilities folks have an idea of what consultant that might be, or Julie?
There are usually engineering consultants that are doing this work, and another reason why we need to have a consultant is to fill those data gaps that we're talking about for groundwater. Those are very technical, that require very specific expertise that we don't have that on staff. We have people who know about groundwater, but to do that kind of really in-depth study, that's a whole other, that's not a person, that's several people who are working on that, and we just don't have those resources to commit to that.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. That was very informative. Great idea. I think it would be great to get updates from time to time as the study is done and as we learn more. So moving on. Our next topic is a discussion of the proposed 2019 Energy Reach Code. And I sense that I'm getting some comment cards. At least one. Are you Tom? You're Tom? Okay, great. Why don't you come on up?
Are you able to get the presentation up?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Tom Cabot. I'm a Menlo Park resident, a fellow commissioner. I advise my Menlo Park Council on Environmental Quality Matters, so I have some empathy for what it's like to be up there and to look at these tough issues, especially these two back-to-back about sea level rise adaptation and then looking at the REACH code. So we can tell there are things we're going to have to do to be adapting, but there's also a lot of rapid movement we can be doing to help you get on your way towards your 80% reduction by 2030 goal. And one of the most important things to come out was last year, the IPCC report that said we essentially have to be doing things all over, making new reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in ways that are rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented. And I know from my 30 years on the Palo Alto staff that those three things are really hard to do as staff. It's hard to go fast, far-reaching, and do things that are unprecedented. It's hard to get support for that. So I want to ask you to do what you can to give support to your staff for doing those things in a REACH code area. We all need to stretch beyond our comfort zones to really make the kind of progress that will keep sea level rise from going too fast. If we can demonstrate the type of leadership that it takes, many communities can follow. And so Menlo Park adopted a strong REACH code just recently that we worked on for at least 12 months to get it together. And I was very heartened to see lots of other communities now making fast progress as well. So one of the things we noticed is that from other consulting work I do on retrofitting, contractors and installers do not want to do those three things. They don't want to go rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented. They want to keep installing what they did last year, just keep making money the same way. So they don't want to be bothered. The thing a REACH code may need to do is take away that easy option to keep making the same stranded asset mistakes year after year and leaving the community burdened with stranded assets, gas assets that need to be removed to get down to your 80 by 20 goals, 80 by 30 goals. So I just want to lend my support, and also I'll be here if you have any questions about the Menlo Park REACH code. I might be able to answer that. And also these cost effectiveness studies are showing that gas-free buildings are cheaper to build, so it can lower the construction cost of building. And that's something that really helps folks out now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Brett Anderson?
Evening, Commissioners. I just forwarded a memo from Carbon Free Palo Alto that we had sent to staff regarding their initial proposal that was released in August for the REACH code. And we had some recommendations in there and made some observations from, Carbon Free Palo Alto's perspective. What we're pushing is a very strong REACH code, if as strong as we can make it, but also in parallel to look at the possibility of banning gas, similar to what Berkeley has done. Since we sent that memo, San Jose unanimously approved that motion. And so they're going ahead to look at a ban in parallel with a strong REACH code. So the REACH code basically has some compliance margins that a mixed fuel building has to comply to, whereas an all-electric building just basically has to conform to the standard code that's coming out for 2020. So California's codes are rising each cycle, and there will be some additional requirements this cycle. All electric buildings in the REACH code do not have to go above that, but mixed fuel buildings do. We think it's better to just go right to a ban because there's really no reason not to do a ban. The market outside of California is extremely robust. 25% of US homes are all electric already, and a rising share of 25%, especially for heating, is all electric. So it's because we're a fossil fuel state that we're really not aware, and our local markets are not aware of these solutions. The CEC approved study has basically shown that it's cost effective, meaning it's less costly to build an all electric home than to add gas into that home. And from all accounts, when people convert to all electric, specifically for cooking, they're very happy with the induction cooking, which is not the old electric cooking. It's a very new way to cook, and on top of the health effects and the safety effects, it also is a much higher performing cooking environment. So people do not go back. They don't want to go back to gas once they go to induction. So we're just talking about a learning curve here for our local market, because we in California have been kind of protected with our fossil fuel history and very cheap natural gas. So in the future, I think a strong regulatory environment supports the long-term investment in a new all-electric renewable infrastructure that has all kinds of benefits compared to burning fossil fuels. And I think, it's incumbent upon us to follow suit with all the other cities to try and push ahead and make sure that the supply chain, the installers, the manufacturers, and even the end customers who are buying this equipment know that they're investing in something that is going to be around for long term, and that's the electric option. It would be very disappointing to find out if I renewed my furnace this year or my water heater that 5 years from now, gas prices double and there's huge rebates to convert to electric. Because I think that's what's coming. If you look what's coming out of the CEC, the CPUC, and all the regional ordinances that are coming into effect this year. So I would just go as aggressive as possible, because we need basically the backstop of good codes and strong regulations to support investment for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. And then I think we'll turn to our staff presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Christine Tam. I'm a Senior Resource Planner in the Utilities Department. And this evening, we'll be going over the proposed REACH code, which is actually just one policy options of pursuing the sustainability goals that both Mr. Cabot and Mr. Anderson just mentioned. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to talk about the significance of building electrification in the context of the city's climate sustainability climate action plan, and a brief kind of little bit of definition of what the energy REACH code is and the process of the REACH code, what has been done to date, and what the options are, and then also some other policy tools from the city that is in our pocket to achieve the goals. And we are seeking input from the commissioners on the policy options for the REACH code, as well as the proposed utility incentive programs. And I want to point out that this is an effort that is interdepartmental, so utilities have been working with staff from development services, planning, as well as from the city manager's office over the past year or so, year and a half, and they're actually with many rounds of input from the stakeholder groups as well as from the community.
And we're not actually presenting a formal,
Right.
proposal tonight. That's not
This, yeah, so tonight, this is not the proposed staff recommendation. This is for getting inputs from the UAC. The staff proposal will be going to the City Council on November 4th with the draft ordinance. That's for the first reading, and then we'll bring it back to Council for second reading later in November.
I think what we're looking for from the UAC tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the different, you've heard some of these different policy options that other agencies are considering. These are things that are in front of Palo Alto for discussion, and I think we're looking for feedback from the UAC, both on those different policy options, and then we have utility programs under consideration. We're doing some internal review to see how many of these we can implement. So we're just looking for feedback to guide our future assessments of these proposals.
Great. So this is a background slide on the strategies for the city to reach our greenhouse gas reduction goal of 80% from the 1990 level by 2030. And if you look at this donut chart, the building sector accounts for 43% of the expected greenhouse gas emissions in order to meet the city's greenhouse gas reduction goal. And of that 43%, that little green slice at the top, that's the reductions from all electric new construction projects. new buildings in the city each year accounts for less than 1% of the total building stock. So even by 2030, if we mandate all new construction project tomorrow, we can only get to that only gets us 5% to our 20 by or 80 by 30 goal. So in terms of the sustainability implementation plan, what we're doing in the short term to reach the 80 by 30 goal, there are 4 areas, and we're focusing on water to reduce inefficient water usage, ensure sustainable water supply, protect creeks and groundwater in the bay. And the second area is mobility, and that's to reduce single occupancy vehicle travel. The third area is electric vehicles. That's to accelerate EV penetration for both Palo Alto based and inbound vehicles. And the fourth area is energy, and this covers both energy efficiency and electrification. And within the energy focus area, we're looking at achieving all cost-effective energy efficiency savings through voluntary programs, encouraging voluntary electrification of the natural gas appliances in the city's buildings, and then also looking at the city's REACH code to see what we can do to encourage both efficiency and building electrification. So what is the Energy REACH code? So by way of background, California Energy Commission, its CEC, adopts the Title 24 Part 6, which is the Building Energy Standards, every 3 years. The current cycle started in 2017, and the next cycle will start in 2020. And all cities all across California, we have to meet the building standards, Title 24, Part 6, at a minimum. And for local governments, local jurisdictions can adopt REACH code that goes above and beyond the state energy standards. And to adopt REACH code, they need to be more stringent than the state requirements. They need to be cost-effective. In other words, it cannot create a cost burden to the building owner through the REACH code. And also, the local REACH code must not preempt federal appliance standards. So Palo Alto adopted our first set of energy REACH code in 2008, and over the last 10 years, we have adopted increasingly stringent REACH codes, and the most current cycle was adopted in 2016. Through Development Services, they have an advisory body called the Green Building Advisory Group, comprised of building professionals, architects, contractors, energy modelers, developers, and they provide input on the priorities of green building ordinance as well as the energy REACH code. And I'm talking about the green building kind of as a broad a broad guidance that covers also the energy REACH code. So this graphic that I'm showing here, this is a diagram of the green building vision that was developed in 2015 through the Green Building Advisory Group. And as you can see in this diagram, the goal of the Green Building Ordinance is to design, build, and operate a new generation of efficient, environmentally responsible, and healthy buildings within the city of Palo Alto. So, Energy REACH code is one component of the green building vision of Palo Alto. And in looking at what the current Energy REACH code looks like, this chart summarizes what the Palo Alto requires of new construction projects. For single-family residential building, they need to be either 10% or 20% more efficient compared to the state-based code, that depending on whether they have solar photovoltaic systems. But if the proposed project is an all-electric building, they are exempted from the REACH code, so they don't need to be more efficient than the state requirements. Similarly, for multifamily residential buildings and for new commercial buildings, they need to be built more efficient than the state requirements, and if it's designed to be an all-electric building, then they are exempted from the REACH code. So from a policy goal perspective, what we're looking at for the 2019 Energy Reach Code, which will take effect in January of 2020, we're looking at two objectives. In the past, we've always tried to go after more cost-effective efficiency from new buildings. But in this new code cycle, we're looking at both energy efficiency as well as emissions. How do we achieve the most the cleanest and most efficient building from an emission and efficiency perspective? Besides these two objectives, we also take into considerations the technical feasibility of energy systems in different types of buildings, the readiness of the market, that's from a customer and a contractor perspective, as well as the enforceability of the REACH code. So for the upcoming code cycle, we started the process back in February of 2018. We hosted a Green Building Summit with the Green Building Advisory Committee, also with speakers from the California Energy Commission and the Air Resources Board to identify the priorities for the green building and the Energy Reach Code in the upcoming ordinance. And we participated in the cost effectiveness study at the state level to identify what are the cost-effective options and how much we can push in terms of our REACH code that can pass the cost-effectiveness criteria. We have actually done a series of public engagement meetings, both with the GBAG, the Green Building Advisory Group, as well with the community. So most recently in August, we have conducted a series of 3 public engagement meetings to solicit their feedback. We had a draft staff proposal presented in the August meetings, and we have gathered feedback from the public on the feedback on the proposal. And we're bringing some of the thinking that we have now to the commission this evening, and we're hoping to incorporate the UAC feedback and then bring a revised staff proposal to the City Council in November. And we still need to submit the REACH code to the CEC for their approval before we can, before the code can become effective. So in terms of the policy options of the REACH code, I want to highlight 3 cities that have currently adopted REACH code: the city of Berkeley, the city of Menlo Park, and the city of San Jose. So starting with the city of San Jose, or city of Berkeley, they have proposed prohibiting all natural gas infrastructure in new buildings starting in 2020. There are some exemptions in this code. It is actually, they are going with an alternative path to this gas ban. It's not through the REACH code. They're using safety reasons for approving this gas ban. There are many exemptions, however, that they are including in the REACH code. ADUs are exempted. That's accessory dwelling units, kind of the in-law units in single-family homes. And then they also allow exemptions in cases where natural gas are deemed to be serving a public interest. And in the case of Menlo Park, they are requiring that all new residential buildings to be electrically heated. So water heating and space heating system must be all electric. They are, however, allowing natural gas use for cooking and fireplace and outdoor grills. They do have a couple of exceptions also to their code for non-residential buildings. Actually, for residential buildings, they are requiring that they are all electric, with the exceptions that life sciences building, they do not need to be all electric. And also public agency owned and operated buildings also can use natural gas. And non-residential kitchens also can appeal for natural gas stoves. And in the case of City of San Jose, the code that was adopted back in September, they are not requiring an all-electric new building mandate. However, they are requiring additional efficiency as well as additional solar installation and coupled with energy storage for the buildings, and that the buildings needs to be all electric ready if it has a gas connection. And San Jose is looking at a possible natural gas ban in the future. So these are the 3 policy options that staff is considering. None of them are perfect. A gas ban is, there are some challenges with adopting an all-electric mandate. First of all, as the speakers earlier mentioned, there is a lack of awareness among homeowners and building owners as well as contractors of the electric alternatives to gas systems. And also, many homeowners, if we ask them, they still love their 25,000 BTU gas cooktop. Also, there are still very limited options for heat pump systems in large office buildings as well as laboratories like life sciences building. We have recently received a letter from the Stanford Research Lab asking that we do not mandate all electric buildings for labs and for large office buildings because it's likely not feasible for heat pump systems to provide the space heating needs for these large buildings. And also from the CEC perspective, the compliance software currently is not ready to accommodate heat pump systems in large commercial office buildings. So these are some of the considerations that staff is thinking about as we consider the different policy options. Now, given that new buildings only account for a small slice of the donut chart that I mentioned earlier, we are also looking at the existing buildings and how to help to promote electrification in the existing building sector. We are looking at expanding the rebate offerings for electrification in existing homes. We already currently have a rebate for heat pump water heater, and we're considering expanding the rebates to include air source heat pumps, induction cooktops, efficient electric clothes dryers, as well as EV charger coupled with a electric panel upgrade. So these are the additional rebates that utilities is currently considering. And we are also considering a clean home rebate to incentivize that all electric residential new buildings be built to be more efficient than the state baseline requirements. We're also looking at pushing out more marketing and outreach to educate the community about the benefits of an all-electric building. So hopefully in the next month or so, we will be rolling out a electrification readiness assessment service to homeowners, and that is part of the current home efficiency Genie service that we offer to our residential customers. We're going to be doing a lot more community outreach through workshops and social media campaign. We have, as Dean mentioned earlier, we have our inaugural Electrification Expo next Thursday at Mitchell Park, and that's something that we're doing in collaboration with San Jose, SVCE, PCE, and Actera. So we hope to do a lot more of these workshops to raise the awareness among not just the homeowners, but also the building professionals. And we're also making available more resources available online in the city's website. We currently have a electrification landing page, www.cityofpaloalto.org/electrification, and it allows anyone to come into this website and look at the alternatives to the different gas appliances. And hopefully, as the rebates gets rolled out, we can add to this landing page. Now, in terms of the budget impact of these new utility programs, the rebates, we will have to, we're considering a rebate of about $2,000 for the clean home rebates. This is the all electric new construction rebate that exceeds the efficiency level from the base case. And then also for converting existing homes to the appliances in existing homes, we're budgeted about $6,000 if they convert everything. So we expect a total rebate amount over the next 3 years of about $850,000. And to run these rebate programs, we're asking for an additional staff of 0.75 FTE, and also a marketing budget of about $100,000 in the first year and $25,000 in the second and the third year.
And I think it's important to emphasize here, these are big asks, and this is why these programs are under consideration right now. This is going to be something we're going to have to talk about internally throughout the department, and then with the city manager as well over the following months. So,
Just a quick clarifying question about, the slide is still up. In year one, all-electric, single-family new construction, the number 35, this is an expected 35 single-family buildings that would take advantage of this? Is that how I read that?
That's our estimate. That's our, yeah.
Is there an estimate of the total amount of carbon saved for the $1 million budget?
Yes. So if we are assuming, so based on the past 5 years of building permits, we get about 100 new construction projects a year. And assuming that 90 of that 100 single-family home new construction project will be built to be all electric, and then we get, the uptake of the 35 and 45 and 50 of the clean home rebates, and an additional additional 5 or 6 commercial buildings that will be built to be all electric. We have an expected avoided greenhouse gas emissions of about 245 metric ton per year. And
But that's from combining REACH code and
combining.
these rebates.
right.
Is the expected carbon savings just from the rebate? Is that broken out?
I don't have that broken out. I can get that out to you.
Okay.
While we're on that slide, could I ask one? Where would the money come from for this $1 million? Do we have, does this come out of ratepayer funds? Does it come out of funds that we have? I know we have some funds, we have some credits. Does it come out of the general fund? Where is it?
So a portion of the funding is going to come from low carbon fuel standard revenues, but only a portion. We've been funding electrification programs out of what's called public benefits funding as a research and development, essentially as a research and development, because these aren't fully commercialized technologies, a research and development activity. We're looking at a variety of different funding sources, including revenues that we get from sales of cap and trade carbon allowances that are allocated to us as part of the Air Resources Board's cap and trade program. So we think we have viable funding sources for this, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be a ratepayer impact to these programs.
Actually, I'm just a little confused. So the all-electric new construction, we'd give a $2,000 rebate. Is that the idea?
If they build it to be at least 12 or 15% more efficient than the base code.
Okay, because if it's all electric right now, it goes to the regular code, not the REACH code.
Right, right.
And so what this would do is this would move it to 12 or 15% over the REACH code.
Correct.
Do we have any sense? Yeah, so someone asked the question of how much carbon does that save? And why $2,000? I mean, is there any relationship to the cost of $2,000 and going 10 to 15% over the REACH code?
So if it's built to be all electric already, by building it to be even more efficient, it doesn't really achieve any additional greenhouse gas emission reductions. However, we always encourage more efficient construction for buildings. And then in terms of, what was the second question? Oh, how did we came up with the $2,000? We actually, as part of the cost effectiveness study, we can see how much it would cost, and this is actually based on a regional level. It would cost additional like $5,000 to meet that 12-15% efficiency. So, you know, we're offering a rebate of about half of what the incremental cost to achieve that additional 12-15% efficiency.
So my concern with this is that it doesn't reduce any further greenhouse gas emissions on the all-electric construction. You know, basically right now we're saying you either meet the REACH code or you don't go electric, right? I mean, or you go all electric and you don't have to meet the REACH code. But it seems that we're misplacing the money here, that the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so isn't the real goal to take existing buildings and try and get people to retrofit them, whereas this does nothing for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, at least on all new electric construction.
So greenhouse gas reduction is one side of the coin, is one objective. The other objective is still to be as efficient as you can be. So, you know, to the extent that efficiency by building homes to be more efficient or buildings to be more efficient, it creates more headroom for additional electrification in the city. It delays further upgrades of the grid infrastructure. So we are still encouraging that our customers do as much of the cost-effective efficiency as they can.
So I'm not sure I follow that completely. Yeah.
I might add too, so, well, I was going to add a couple of additional points, but just, you want to cover, sort of reiterate the value of efficiency here?
Yeah, so we always encourage cost-effective efficiency as a utility because it saves the customer money over the long term in the bill, and also it creates more room, more capacity for the city's electric grid to handle additional electric load growth.
So we have a shrinking load. Am I wrong about that? If we have a shrinking load, look, I don't want to get into a longer discussion about that, but my understanding is we have a shrinking load, which actually causes problems on the long term. But I think efficiency is good. The question I'm really asking is, shouldn't we putting the money where it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, which would be to take existing buildings and electrify them, as opposed to new construction, which once it's already electrified, why go the extra? Why? I mean, it's great if they do it, but why should we subsidize it? Because we have limited amount of things we can subsidize. So shouldn't we be subsidizing the things that will meet our SCAP and meet the city council goals, as opposed to subsidizing something that doesn't, just because we think efficiency is a good thing? I think efficiency is a good thing too. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying we don't have unlimited dollars, so why spend it here? And that's, I mean, I don't necessarily expect an answer to that. That's my concern. My concern is that I don't think we're spending the money in the right way. I also think we need to put what the staffing costs in this. So I don't know what 0.75 of a FTE would cost on this, but I'm guessing it's at least 150,000. That's probably more than that. It's probably 200,000, right? Because you're fully loading the benefits. It's, you know, so if you add in an extra 200 grand, so if we're spending 100,000 on marketing and 200,000 on the person for a total rebate amount of 168, I'm not sure that's a good use of money. So I know that's only the first year, but even on the second year, I would ask if that's a good use of money. So I just raise questions about those concerns.
Commissioner, can I speak to your first,
Sure.
Your first point? I think it's not apparent from the table, but that third program listed in blue there is about existing buildings, and you can see it is unfortunately not all multiplied out. But if you multiply it out, the vast majority of the funding in this program will go towards existing buildings. So we are devoting the majority of these funds to existing buildings. The other thing, just reiterating the point on efficiency, we do have there is a value in these clean home rebates to getting people to actually install electric homes. Because while electric homes are cheaper to install up front, they have a higher, right now, they have a higher energy bill long-term. This, by tightening up the building shell, using this clean home rebate, number one, it encourages efficiency, which has all of the benefits that Christine's been raising, and is also a mandate and a responsibility for us. But it also lowers the bill long-term, and so for those people who are thinking life cycle cost, it gets them over the finish line. So that's the reason for that's the main reason for the clean home rebate on all electric new construction.
Do we think that $2,000 would actually do it? I mean, building, let's say it's $600 or $700 a square foot to build a building in Palo Alto. I'm just skeptical of whether or not we're really just throwing this money away, and that people are either going to do this for the reasons you said over the life cycle, or they're not going to do it. I mean, I have a really hard time believing that $2,000 on any building project in Palo Alto makes any difference, I mean, to be honest.
Noted.
All right, I'm done.
I think I too share the passion that increasing the incentive to move to electric is positive, but the numbers do need to add up appropriately. And if I look at the slide where you've identified achieve 80% reduction in greenhouse gas below 1990 levels by 2030, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past. We've talked about our opportunities and where our greatest opportunities were. If I look at non-auto mobility options at 15%, and electrify Palo Alto-based and inbound vehicles at 25%, I'm at 40% of possibilities. It's a wider pool, if you will. And one of the options that was raised earlier was the possibility of incentives, other incentives that the city could consider doing. Sorry, I'm just getting the correct slides. And that would include air source heat pump, induction cooling, Energy Star electric clothes dryers, EV charger installation, and electric panel upgrades. All of those have to do with autos or home, existing home, and there's tremendous opportunity there as well. So have we looked at the numbers associated with these four?
You mean the greenhouse gas reduction numbers as opposed to?
Providing additional rebates. If we believe that rebates are the answer to increased electrification, have we looked at the numbers associated with increasing the incentives for these four?
We currently don't have any incentive rebates currently we only have a rebate for heat pump water heaters. So the other boxes, those are not yet checked.
So those are opportunities.
So those are the other equipment that we're hoping to roll out new rebates for.
But they're different than this.
Right. So that's assuming that everything, if there's 15 homes that went for all of those rebates, that $6,000 covers heat pump water heater, air source heat pumps, induction cooktop, clothes dryer, and panel upgrade.
They would be eligible for $6,000.
Right.
Okay. Okay, sorry, that's not clear. That's now clear, thank you.
Sorry about that. I aggregated the number.
No worries. So with respect to the funding element, I think that's also something that maybe we should spend a little more time on. Jonathan, you highlighted that a certain portion of these credits would be, a certain portion of these rebates would be funded through low carbon fuel refund credits, but a certain portion is funded elsewhere. From our prior conversations, we've talked at length about credits and the use of credits and the buildup of these funds. Has there been further discussion with respect to how to apply credits appropriately?
Are you referring to the previous discussion that we had with the commission about the idea of trading California renewable energy credits for out-of-state renewable energy credits and using that funding for?
I am.
Okay.
Selling those credits and
Yeah.
using that funding appropriately.
So we haven't been able to make progress on that since our last meeting. We've had some energy supply, some things we need to prioritize about getting our energy supply for next year situated. But we are going to be working on that over the next few months, and that, as we said, we'll come back to the commission and talk about that as an option. And if we went down that road, that would possibly generate funding that could be used for these building electrification rebate programs without generating ratepayer impacts. But we do need to work through the issues of, we do need to explore all the issues around optics and public perception that sort of a program would create.
Thank you. I think it's important that we do spend the appropriate time to do that. Public optics appropriate as well, but I think it's also equally important to highlight that some of these credits can be lost in time, and when we have an opportunity to increase our electrified neighborhoods, meet our goals, we don't want to lose the opportunity to fund those, particularly since they are available to us today.
Absolutely, and we'll be moving forward with our evaluation on a schedule that will allow us to take full advantage of everything that remains in front of us.
Cool.
All the opportunities that remain in front of us.
I wanted to make sure I understood something you said about heat pump systems in large buildings not yet available. Is that what you said? That they can't handle that size of a building?
Yes, so large heat pumps, if we're talking about a very large commercial building, something over 100,000 square foot, for example, we would need a very large heat pump system, which could also create a very large electrical load, and it would be very heavy. It needs to occupy a large space because heat pumps runs by pulling the heat from the surrounding air. So we're still actually talking to consultants to find out how many commercial buildings that are over 100,000 square foot that can be built to be all electric. I think commercial buildings under 30,000 square feet, that's easily done to be built all electric. But we're looking at the very large commercial buildings, and Palo Alto does have a number of very large commercial office buildings and labs in the research park that we're concerned about. And we could create a REACH code that only mandates commercial buildings that are less than 30,000 square feet to be built to all electric standards. But the building code is not really structured around the square footage. The building code applies to non-residential buildings versus residential buildings.
So one thing we haven't talked about you're also interested in getting feedback on which of the REACH codes that you've presented to us make sense for Palo Alto, right?
Yes.
And these are all implemented today?
Those are all adopted REACH codes or adopted codes in other cities.
Because I just don't see any exceptions for large buildings, per se. But it seemed like when we also in our packet today was customer satisfaction feedback, and it seemed like the clear message was our customers are cost sensitive and they're very interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it seems to me it makes sense that we implement a REACH code that addresses those desires. So I don't know how we don't do that without having some kind of electrification REACH code.
We also just received a letter from the Stanford Research Park asking that, or actually stating the fact that for life science buildings and for large commercial buildings, it's very hard for them to be designed to be all electric. So that's one additional data point.
So I guess it would be helpful to know how much greenhouse gas we're saving if we're exempting large buildings and we're exempting particular kinds of buildings, and we're not necessarily mandating it for single-family homes that are, any kind of retrofitting, what we're getting here, and which of these REACH codes we have or some amalgamation of them makes the most sense in terms of getting the most reduction at a cost-effective rate.
I think that's the sort of feedback that we're looking for.
I have a number of questions. The first is sort of procedural in the sense that it sounds to me like a REACH code is a building code. Is that right?
Yes.
All right, so I can understand it as a building code, one could ban, natural gas in new construction. How does a REACH code deal with, not that it's a bad idea, but how does a REACH code implement replacing existing gas appliances in existing buildings with electric appliances? I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but is that a REACH code?
So at the state level, the building energy standards, it does not address existing buildings. And for cities, the REACH code only goes beyond the building energy standards required by the California Energy Commission. So it's difficult for a local jurisdiction to adopt REACH code to address the existing buildings. We have looked into it, and it's not straightforward. We can't impose the code. Let's say if we require that any remodeling project over 1,000 square feet would trigger the REACH code, then the 1,000 square feet could be just the living room and the bedroom. But if it triggers the REACH code, then it needs to rewire all the appliances in that building, and it's considered out of scope. So it's hard for our buildings department to enforce that type of code. It could get challenged.
Understand. I think that clarifies my question. So anytime a homeowner applies for any sort of building permit, a REACH code may or could be applied at that point to motivate electrification if that was our goal, right? But you just can't walk up, just because you change the law, if I don't apply for a building permit, it doesn't apply to me, correct? So it doesn't do anything about existing appliances until that homeowner or building owner applies for a building permit to do something new. Is that correct?
Right. So for most people, when they change out their water heater, they may or may not pull a water heater permit. If they change out their clothes dryer, most likely they don't pull a permit. So for just standalone appliances, it's unlikely that the homeowner would pull a permit.
Yep, okay. All right, so that was sort of my procedural question. I think that if you're looking for advice, I feel like my question is, why aren't we proposing new construction needs to be all electric? And I understand that there are exceptions and there are reasons to carve out some exceptions. It looks like other cities have done so. So my question is, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we saying we should not, it's not voluntary, let's do it. Let's ban gas with these exceptions.
Commissioner Jackson, I just want to emphasize that we're not offering a proposal tonight. So
I understand, but if you're asking for advice about what you're trying to do for a REACH code,
Right.
to me, the REACH code should say that. If I was going to propose a new REACH code, I'd say, let's do that.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, that would be my opinion.
Thank you.
And the other point, and then I would say that because this whole issue about the stranded assets and electrification of existing things is expensive, is complicated, and rebates may or may should help, this whole issue that Commissioner Smith raised, again, and we've discussed this previously, is that there's a potential large, reasonably large amount of money that could be generated through this out-of-state rec. An aggressive approach to that could generate a lot of money that could then be applied to the rebates for motivating homeowners to change out and upgrade to all-electric homes. So that's a lot of money. So we could go do that thing that's aggressive with the out-of-state recs and apply that money directly to existing home electrification. So that would be my thoughts there. And then finally, the last point I make about, I think that education, both of homeowners, is very important. I think it's not just the advantages of all electric homes, it's also the dangers of the environmental impact of natural gas. I'm not an expert in any of this. I never even heard of that until my first UAC meeting in June, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got all this gas up in us. I'm such a bad guy. So I've already been educated. And the other thing I'd like to say about education is I think it's very important to educate children about this, because as just in my anecdotally, as I see people that I've encountered in my life over the last 10 years who are early adopters of both electrical vehicles and PV panels, many times there was a family motivation coming through the children who were like, what are we as a family going to do to address it? So I would say that the education should include not only adults, but children.
Thank you.
So I'll address the REACH code thing. So I appreciate you coming to us early on this, and I think it's really helpful. I think that eventually you will propose a plan to not allow natural gas in new construction. I think we're probably going to move in that direction. So I think you're thinking about the right things, which are, what are the exemptions? And it seems that the exemptions are interesting. Internal ADUs, I'm guessing, we as a city want to encourage ADUs. That seems to be current city council policy. And if you had to rewire all your systems on an internal basis, that would discourage ADUs. So I think those are the right things to think about. So I like that one. Obviously, I don't know the answers to most of these questions, but I think you're thinking about the right thing. On the large buildings, come up with a solution so that we solve that issue. Because if we don't have the technology, frankly, then we shouldn't, unless we're making a policy that we're not going to allow large buildings in our research park. So I think we need to make it work, is what I'm saying, and I don't know what the solution is. I did think it was really interesting to exempt in single-family homes stoves, fireplaces, or other appliances. So I don't know about other appliances. I mean, I'm not sure why you would need a gas dryer as opposed to an electric one. I mean, I hear that induction stoves do work really well, but I know a lot of people really like to cook with gas. I think for me, the question is, if we allowed gas cooking, is that something that is going to cause a lot of greenhouse gas emissions? Is that really an issue, or is it not really an issue? I don't know the answer. That's sort of how I would look at some of these. The same with with fireplaces. We don't really want people to do wood-burning stoves. I think we've outlawed wood-burning stoves in new construction. Are we going to say, I think most people move towards converting their fireplaces or whatever to natural gas there. You know, is that something we want to tell people they can no longer do? I don't think there's a good solution to that one, other than you just say you're not going to have it. But if it's not really a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions, is that something we want to do? The other thing I thought about was barbecues in the backyard. A lot of people have their gas hooked up to their barbecue in their backyard. If you say we're not going to do that, then all people are going to do is put a little propane tank in the back. It seems to me that it's better to allow people to do it than to have them have little propane tanks. But maybe it's not. I mean, I don't know the efficacy of the two between them. So I'm just saying, that's the kind of things I want us all to think through.
So we are, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So we are thinking about that. I think one of the interesting dimensions to this is that there is a point where it becomes unsustainable to have a gas utility infrastructure that just serves these small uses. Cooking is, in fireplaces and barbecues, are no more than 10% of gas load. And so it might make sense as a transitional strategy to have, to allow those sorts of uses. But long-term, we don't want to have a lot of houses that just have those uses and yet have all of this gas utility infrastructure running to it that needs to be maintained and is transporting very little gas. So that's just another dimension to add to the mix there.
Yeah, no, I've raised this issue for years now, right? I mean, you know, are you going to shut down the gas utility? I mean, if so, I mean, I think that it's going to take a long time for people who have all those existing buildings you point to electrify. And I don't think a significant number of them will. And so the question is how are you going to run a gas electricity with all your fixed costs? And I actually thought the answer is, well, there's not that much new construction. You can run a gas utility with your current load. You're doing just fine on it. So the fact that we're just talking about new construction doesn't really affect it. It affects it when you have large scale moving away from that. It may affect it on the commercial buildings if people start tearing them down. But I'm thinking this is 10, 15, 20, I mean, I don't know what the time frame out is. In the meantime, I do think you should allow people to use the gas for the barbecues, for their fireplaces, it's far enough out. Unless we're just going to make a policy that in 10 years we're going to shut our utility down, at which point I think you need to announce to the public, make it transparent, let people complain if they want a gas utility, and, you know, and then the question is, I don't know the legal answer to this, does PG&E have a right to come in and run a gas utility because people have a right to gas, or we say people have no right to gas in Palo Alto and there's no further gas in Palo Alto? I mean, I think if you want to deal with it, I think it needs to be done in a transparent way that the community gets to make a decision. And until we make that decision, I think it's fine to have the little uses in new construction.
I'll be very, very brief here. I share the concerns of a lot of my other colleagues and you know, would like to see a REACH code that will reduce greenhouse gases, and we can say, you know, we've really taken some steps in that regard. But I am concerned, I agree with Commissioner Scharf, that we not impose electrification requirements on buildings where the technology isn't there to really support that. I mean, we looked at putting a heat pump into our condominium, and it's too big. It's to work. I'm also going to, the other thing that this points out to me also is the importance of our resiliency discussion, because if we go to all electric buildings, the electricity has to stay on. We've seen problems when we've had outages. And if there's gas, at least you can cook, at least you can have some heat. I think if we're going to adopt these kinds of REACH codes, we are going to need a marketing effort to reassure people that they will have a reliable supply of electricity. And, hopefully we will have electric storage, reasonably priced electric storage in the reasonably near future. And I think that makes a lot of this much easier in terms of getting people to accept the idea that they're going to give up gas.
Yeah, the notice clearly that was sent out does not give you that comfort.
Any other commissioner comments? I have just a few thoughts. I just want to raise again what some thoughts from Brett Anderson in the public comment period about looking at this through the lens of contractors, who I think are really on the front lines of making recommendations and being in a position to heavily influence the choices that at least residential customers make, as well as the point he made about because we're here and we have a gas utility, it can be hard to imagine all electric living, but certainly I agree that there are lots of other cities in the US and in other countries where they build perfectly comfortable, charming, all-electric homes. And I don't want to get hung up on outdoor barbecues. Honestly, I think if people have a propane grill that probably releases more greenhouse gas per chicken leg than natural gas, but I'm not sure those are the numbers we should be looking at. So I guess I would say I would be very interested in a REACH code that required all electric new buildings with few exemptions, except for the ADU. I would agree with Commissioner Scharf that we don't want to do anything to disincentivize the construction of ADUs. And similarly, for non-residential buildings, yes, there's going to be a lengthy list of exemptions, but I still think it's worth, to my mind, trying to start from a place of all-electric construction for new commercial buildings and just listing out every exemption so that nobody's unduly distressed, but hopefully that, again, creates contractor expertise, local expertise, spurs the market for for air source heat pump space heating on commercial scale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as far as the appliance or the incentive programs, I kind of echo Commissioner Scharf's line of thinking around the rebate program. It feels like it's a lot of staff time and a fair amount of money for a fairly low carbon impact. And it's unclear that a $2,000 rebate is going to move the needle one way or the other. I'd be very interested, however, if there is a way to find a way to use a similar amount of funds towards solving the contractor education and expertise problem. I have no idea what that would be. And similarly, it sounds like you're already thinking about rebates for other appliances in addition to heat pump water heaters, and that's another sort of, to me, much more concrete way to spend the money than $2,000 on a new Palo Alto home.
Commissioner, just to make sure I have your comments.
Yeah.
Are you referring to the all-electric new construction?
Slide 14.
Slide
Yep.
14, the top two programs. Are you also referring to the third program?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Primarily focused on
I'm
the-
slightly on the fence about the third one.
Okay.
I agree that that conversion is the one that matters, or that as an incentive program, incentivizing conversion of mixed fuel to all electric homes is where we do want to spend the money. Is $6,000 the right number? I really don't know. And maybe that comes out in the appliances that they, if it's a per appliance rebate, maybe that's a better way to think about it. And then, I don't know. Or maybe it's $6,000 just for ripping out your gas lines.
That was actually an earlier version of this conversion rebates. We will offer a $6,000 one-time rebate if they disconnect the gas meter. But as we talked through it some more internally, we thought that it would give homeowners a little more flexibility by having this manual option of rebates as opposed to a one-time conversion rebate, because most homeowners probably are not considering doing everything at once. They'll probably phase in the conversion of the appliance as they need to be replaced, or as they can afford it, or as they can, have the time to think through it. So we have since kind of changed our thought from a one-time conversion, one lump sum of $6,000 to this manual option of single appliance rebates.
Oh, and the other thing I was going to mention, and I'm sure you're already thinking about this, but a different all-electric rate with either no tiers or different tiers, I think, has to go along with these, with the REACH codes, or people are going to have a strong disincentive to participate.
That's in our work plan, and we've made significant progress.
All right, thanks everyone for a good discussion. We are running quite a bit behind schedule. We'll see if we can make up the time a little bit. Moving to item number 3, a discussion of utilities customer programs. And I don't think we have any comments from the public, so let's move straight to the staff presentation.
So, while Lena Perkins, an acting senior resource planner, comes up, just want to note that we're talking a lot about electrification tonight. 5-10 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. So we've seen a lot of change in the utility department's priorities for customer programs. We're taking on a wider range of responsibilities, and so that's led us to feel the need to step back and re-examine our mission and our priorities for the utilities customer program group. And Lena Perkins is has been working on this effort and is going to present our current thinking. We're looking for feedback on whether our priorities, the priorities we're listing, reflect our customers' priorities generally. We've attached, as Commissioner Siegel noted, a customer survey we did last year. This is background information, but we're happy to answer any questions you have on the customer survey. And if you want to go into a lot of depth and we're running short on time, we can schedule a follow-up discussion on the survey itself as well.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. My name's Lena Perkins, and I'm an acting senior resource planner in the utilities department. And first thing, I just want to introduce Bruce Lesh, and you have to raise your hand. And Bruce is the manager of the utility program services, and so many of the programs I'll be talking about today are really his work and his team's work, and we're just sort of going through more or less a strategic priority update for how we choose programs and how we implement those programs. And also on the attachments, I do want to note we gave you a lot of information to go with a fairly high-level presentation. The attachment C is our demand-side management report, so that's more or less an annual report for Bruce's group and the customer programs and their successes. And I think that's really worth your time to look into, as well as the residential survey from about a year ago. I think there's some interesting takeaways there. Okay, so an outline of my presentation this evening. The purpose is to provide an update and solicit your feedback, provide an update on our past programs, provide an update on current priorities, and we've added CO2 to those priorities, and then let you know what programs are coming and how they will align with our new additional priority of CO2 and how we think they will address some of the customer feedback we've received in these surveys. And then to really focus your input on the priorities themselves, thinking about those as goals and objectives, and is that enough? Does that represent success? And what's missing from there, if anything, that would be that would warrant reprioritizing? So we'll provide an overview, show you our request for feedback, which I'll land on at the end, and then brief progress update, sort of the DSM in 2 slides, the demand side management report in a couple slides, and upcoming programs, which I think is worth talking about too if you have any questions or how those are going to address our customers' wants and needs, and why we're choosing those strategically. And then next steps. Okay, so for more than 30 years, City of Palo Alto Utilities and largely utility program services have been running customer programs in the areas of efficiency, income qualified programs, local renewables, and emerging technologies. And efficiency encompasses water, gas, and electric efficiency. So there's a lot of expenditures there. Since 2015, we've added low carbon transportation, building decarbonization, and sustainability more broadly. And that's really leading to why I'm here today. So what opportunities do we have for synergy and cross-selling different programs, as well as which programs can really have outsized impact across the board, and how do we compare these programs on an apples-to-apples basis? So where do we get the most GHG per dollar, for example? So these programs use restricted use funds, so some examples are the low carbon fuel standard funds and the public benefit surcharge on electric. Some required programs include efficiency programs and local renewables. Again, we've added these 3 areas since 2015: low carbon transport, building decarbonization. I'm talking about fuel switching there, natural gas to electricity, and sustainability. We have some flexibility in how we design and implement these programs. And we've added CO2 as a prioritization criteria in order to let the programs that fulfill that along with another mission kind of float to the top. And the real ask of the UAC is on the next slide relating to our prioritization criteria, and that's what I'm using as more or less evaluation criteria when we are weighing these programs against each other, and that's where I would like to focus your input. So you have the slides in front of you. One way to look at this framing is, what do? We have these 8 work areas. You need community engagement to educate people and to drive interest in the programs. So that's why UPS, Utility Program Services, has been a natural home for these new areas. And then the other work areas I already mentioned. And then in terms of priorities that we're using to evaluate programs, we got customer satisfaction, equity, emissions impact, efficiency savings, and cost effectiveness. And this is what we're currently using, and there are some reasons for that related to the restricted funds, but we do want to hear from you and incorporate your priorities wherever possible. And we're trying to take the lessons learned from the strategic plan and really leverage technology and analytics, and a number of our initiatives that are rolling out, as well as customer and community engagement. That's part of why I'm here today, to hear from you as the voice of the community, the voice of council, voice of customers, because again, we do have commercial customers, for what are your priorities and are we hitting them? And then leveraging regional partnerships wherever possible to have a greater impact. So I'm not going to go through this slide right now. We'll land on it at the end. But these, when I say priorities, these are sort of the goals and objectives you can think about in terms of framing. So if there's 5 high-level goals, here are some sub-bullets in terms of what it would mean, what we consider it to mean to meet these goals. So now into the progress update for how our past programs have done, and I'll be reporting fiscal year 18 will be the last year that I'll be reporting on today. We are working on providing you earlier feedback in the review cycle. But on the left-hand side, we have the efficiency savings. This is electric, natural gas, and water savings. Two things I want to highlight here. The goals or the targets are what are adopted and submitted to the state. And it's on for electric and gas, it's on a 4-year cycle. We adopt new goals every 4 years. And so those are in the darker outlined blocks. So those are targets, that's what we're trying to hit. And then the shaded behind lighter colored bar charts there are how we did the last year. So I have from fiscal year 18 back to 15. You can see the goals in 18 for natural gas were nearly double the year prior. So that dark bar went up a lot in fiscal year 18, and we nearly hit it. So that was a big push by Bruce and his group. And then for electric, we actually exceeded our goal that had increased about 20% from the year before. And again, Bruce and his group did a lot of work to make these tiny bars up there on the graph. And one of the reasons we adopted higher goals was because efficiency savings, especially in electricity and natural gas, do save carbon. And that is the community priority in saving carbon. And so we went for these aggressive goals, and most communities actually lowered their efficiency goals because if you have been running efficiency programs for a long time, there is less low-hanging fruit. So this is really impressive and really notable for Bruce and his group. And then on the right-hand side, I have the CO2 avoided by these programs. So this is direct attribution of programs that we can claim, more or less. And a couple things I wanted to draw your attention to. We have electric efficiency, gas efficiency. Heat pumps are actually there, but you can't see them yet, but we expect them to scale. They did provide about 1% of the natural gas savings of these goals. So they were showing up on the pie chart in the demand side management. And then we have Palo Alto Green, which is 100% renewable program we offer to our commercial customers. And we have the carbon impact of local solar. And I can spend time talking about how these programs avoid carbon, or I can not. One thing I will draw your attention to is that electric efficiency programs did actually avoid as much carbon as gas efficiency programs in fiscal year 18. And that is because although the community and the utility procure 100% renewable and hydropower, so 100% carbon neutral power, we procure that at off-site locations, and then we pull from whatever the grid is providing at that time. And so they are two sides of the same coin, but in essence, since there's natural gas on the grid 97% of the time, saving electricity saves carbon 97% of the time. And it's really all about when that electricity is being used. If you want, and we actually have gone into hourly accounting, hourly average emission accounting, and we are building that in, and it's built in, and we're using it in our efficiency models. So it is about when you use electricity, both seasonally and hourly, but we don't have pure carbon neutral power piped to us through a separate system. So, okay. And then this is a slide worth spending some time on to make sure that I'm explaining it well enough, and I really want your questions on this, and Bruce is here as well. But these are some of the new programs and how they align with our priorities. Then these are new programs launching. So I have those 5 priorities on the left side, and then the new programs. And I've only, although many of the programs address multiple priorities, I've only, signified them with an icon where they're expected to have a major contribution. And so, and there's a lot of data gobbledygook here, but if you notice a couple things, items, the programs 3, 4, 7, 8, and 10 all actually address all of these priorities. So a single program or initiative is expected to substantially improve customer satisfaction. It's important from an equity perspective, either serving income qualified customers or covering an important sector, have a major emissions and efficiency impact, as well as being extremely cost effective. So, we've heard our customers, they really care about being affordable and being positive for the climate, and so we are leveraging that wherever possible. And of course, customer experience is everything as a local utility. So the upcoming, so we can revisit that slide later, but the upcoming expenditures, I've broken them out by the 8 different categories, and the key things that will be different this year that we're now in, fiscal year 20 versus last year in fiscal year 19, we are launching the small medium business concierge, efficiency concierge program, and that will be a major efficiency program. Also the customer usage reports, so the O-Power, the home energy report, home water report, also for commercial. That will be a major efficiency initiative that will also save carbon. And then we're also, we are currently rolling out an internal software tool to track these programs better and be able to compare them on an even basis. So, you can see the orange bar, the efficiency expenditures are going to be larger than last year. And the other really large impact is on the low carbon transportation. So those are, that Hiromi Kelty, I think, was here last month talking about all the different initiatives around EVs. So with that, that's my presentation. I welcome questions, or if you want to have a follow-up meeting due to the late time, it's understandable as well.
Maybe if there are commissioners who have formulated feedback, why don't we take that now? But if you want some more time to think of it, then we'll encourage you to take the time.
I just want to say 2 things. First of all, these slides are so clear and so amazing. The amount of material you got in one image is like compliments to whoever worked on that. And then the other one was in terms of the economics of all of it. If we could get feedback on that, that would be super helpful.
Sorry, so economics?
Of the different programs. I mean, you're asking feedback for how to prioritize.
Yes.
And I think that economics is a huge factor to prioritize.
And great.
Was that the question? You wanted us to prioritize or say these are all good, or I was unclear of what the ask is.
And I recognize that. So this is essentially what our goals and objectives are, and we don't have a ton of flexibility to pivot away from this, but we can, if there's anything egregiously, glaringly missing from this list that you think, should be weighed at the same level as these other considerations, we would very much like to hear that now. And then what we're going to be doing is translating these sub-bullets into KPIs.
So I think there is.
Yes.
Last time I served on council, we were very still concerned with keeping rates low. And that's not a priority here. And I recall that actually being put in our long-range forecast or long-range plan at the time. And when we just did the customer satisfaction survey, that was something that was really high. So I believe that still meets council priorities is to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that should be a goal that we set forth. I mean, for several reasons. First of all, I think it's the right thing to do. Second of all, I think it's good for the public to see that we care about that and have it out there. And I think it's good for staff to keep it in mind as well.
And I can more explicitly call that out under cost effectiveness because because some of these things are mandatory programs with restricted use funds, the best way to keep rates low is use restricted use funds as efficiently as possible and only restricted use funds.
So I have a couple of questions with respect to the new programs. And the easiest way for me to look at this is literally just look at my own home. Number one, income qualified multifamily furnace retrofit using heat pumps. The technology for heat pumps for single family residents, great, no problem. The current program that's available to my family is basically, the rebate is such that the equipment itself is largely paid for through the rebate, right?
Sorry, heat pump water heater?
Heat pump water heater.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
So that, yeah.
So you qualified this program as income qualified multifamily?
So this is launched, and it's a special grant from Bachman to retrofit a multifamily residences with heat pump space heaters. And so
where do we draw the line at income qualified in Palo Alto?
So our current line is at the very low HUD level, HUD level for Santa Clara County.
Which is?
I can get back to you with an exact number. It's, do you have, it's in the ballpark of $50,000 for a single person household, and it goes up for, yeah.
So one of the things that was shared with us as part of an addenda to this package was the overview of Palo Alto demographics, building profiles and utility customer profiles and associated programs. And in going through it, the household annual income level in calendar year, this is 2015, so I'm not entirely certain what it's going to be in 2018. I would imagine more. But if you look at our population, 15% of our population earns $35,000 or less. I would call that income qualified.
Yeah.
But I would also actually argue that even the $35,000 to $75,000 in 2015 would probably be income qualified as well. So if you look at that combination, you're looking at 29% of the population. So more than a third, potentially more than a third of our population is income qualified if you look at it just from a, so why aren't we extending this to single family residences? Why are we focused on multifamily? And
this
sorry,
grant,
before you answer that question.
go ahead.
I have
It's
the
a good
same,
question.
I have the same issue almost with number 5, which is the EV charger for multifamily. Again, relating it back to my personal residence. So a charger for our electric car is about $500. That's not the issue. The issue is actually a panel is a 1957 home. And the panel replacement alone is probably in the order of $1,500 to $2,500. So I'm looking at least $3,000 to $3,500 for an EV charger. So if I load that on top of my $2,000 heat pump, you can see how my incentive to go to electrified is not so incentivized.
Right, and that's something that we are looking to address with some of the upcoming programs that are still in discussion. These are the ones that are approved and launching, and so these have been in the works for about 18 months because it's a fairly involved process. But I take your point that single-family residences are in need of EV and
We need a
electrification incentives as well. Is that your point?
Yeah, it is my point, because I think if I look at the number of multifamily residences in Palo Alto, quite frankly, it's very low relative to the 62,000 population.
It is 40% of our population.
Okay, well, that's better than I thought.
Yeah, and they are an extremely hard group to reach because a large majority of those are renters, and so there's a split incentive where the landlord has minimal incentive to invest in these infrastructure upgrades, especially when housing is very in demand. So we are specifically targeting multifamily with several programs because we are uniquely positioned to help an underserved segment overall. We have been less successful, as are all utilities, in catalyzing change for the multifamily folks.
So if we, sorry, just carrying this through, and to an earlier comment made about money spent wisely, if 60% of the population is in single-family homes, do we have statistics on the number of this 60% that are actually electrified homes?
We do have some statistics from a fairly in-depth study a couple of years ago.
Which would reflect half?
Of
Third?
Of what percentage of single-family homes are already all electric? Mm-hmm. It's closer to 8%, or like, it's something.
It's low.
Yeah, I have to get back to you. It's in the single digits. It's in the single digits, and it's a holdover from
1957.
Yeah.
I just think, I'd like to go on record that I think that there is more thought, perhaps, that we could take a look at some incentive programs that would look at the 60% of the population that lives in single-family homes that were built between 1954 and 1958.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they have electric resistance water heaters, then that's a no-brainer. Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree.
Just very quick.
Okay.
This slide, I think, is really, really helpful to me, and I really do want to, now that you've put it in front of me,
Yeah.
I can think about each of these programs, but I do think having kind of cost numbers so that we have some sense of, we don't tell you to put all your eggs in the most expensive program.
Yeah, and I think that that's exactly what, we want to do. We're still kind of catching up to our process where we want to bring you possibilities for programs, because these, were from our best understanding of you and our customers, and they're essentially in the process of launching. But they are, as you can see, all but the EV charger, multifamily concierge, and the income qualified, which you were very good to call out, are extremely cost effective. And so on a portfolio basis, we have really emphasized the bulky, high impact, relatively inexpensive programs. And then for harder to reach segments, sometimes those are worth spending more just from an equity basis because the uptake is so low in some of the bulkier programs.
Since we're doing this tonight, the one category that I don't see on the list, you have customer satisfaction and customer service. But to me, customer education is probably higher than either of those. Not that I don't want satisfied and well-served customers, but I think that's worth having a line item for education.
And I like that one because it's also probably measurable. And so I thank you for that.
Any other commissioner thoughts? When we were on the call, my understanding is you're seeking input on the prioritizing the priorities, if you will, more than feedback on individual programs.
The feedback on individual programs is always welcome. It'll be hard to implement for these, but we can fold them into future considerations. But
because I guess I'm wondering, because we had a whole item, I think it was just last month, around electrification and programs around EV charging. So I assume there will be other opportunities, to drill down on individual programs over time.
Right. So we'll have a customer programs work plan early next year to give feedback on both, which programs and also particular considerations and rollout of those.
Well, I'll give you my specific feedback on the question you asked around should carbon reduction be one of the priority areas, and it's kind of woven in, I think, well, no, it's reduce carbon emissions. It's not even woven in, it's called out, along with efficiency savings. My feeling is that that is completely appropriate and should definitely be on the list of priorities, including, helping to make these trade-offs between single-family and multifamily and renters and owners. I think that continuing to target the segments where there's a lot of carbon savings to be had for the money that we spend on the program is a good way to think about it. All right. So, given the lateness of the hour, and given the fact that our fourth topic is more for our sake, for education, than staff needing feedback, is my understanding, I'm wondering if there is interest in pending topic number 4 to a later meeting. Any feedback? I'm seeing some nods. Does anybody, do we have to do a motion for that? I'm unclear on what does anybody want to move that we pen topic 4 to next?
Defer the topic to a later UAC.
All right, all those in favor? All right, so then we will move on to topic number 5. Any input on items we should be discussing at future UAC meetings? All right.
It looks like we have a pretty good menu here of things that are coming up. We've got the resiliency workshop next month,
Yes.
but then December, January, February all look like we've got lots of things to discuss.
I am awash in a sea of paper. I can't actually find our list of upcoming topics, but I believe you. Yeah, there we go.
In terms of, this is going back to an earlier comment and an earlier discussion, and I apologize, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but we really should circle back with respect to the use of credits. I don't think we finished that conversation, and I don't know if it's a workshop that's appropriate or if it's another discussion topic, but I think there's more to be discussed.
We'd been hoping to come back to you in December, maybe closer to January. If we've covered that topic effectively by June of next year, we should still be in a good position to take advantage of next year's opportunities. So we have a few things going on in the energy supply area, and we're going to move forward as fast as we can on evaluating that.
Yeah, so the only concern that I think I have, and I hope I'm not alone in this, is that the loss of the credit would be bad in my estimation.
So when would we lose the credit? You keep saying the loss of the credit.
So there's a potential, and perhaps Jonathan, you can shed more light on it, but there is a potential for us losing a substantial amount of money opportunity. It's an opportunity where we are able to, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, sell our credits.
Our banked credits? Is that what we're talking about?
It's partially about the banked, but it's more about the fact that we are well in excess of our RPS, our renewable requirements, using California renewables, and the amount that we're in excess decreases every year. It's very high right now, and it'll keep decreasing as the renewable requirements increase over time. And so there is sort of a shrinking opportunity to trade our California renewable energy credits for out-of-state renewable energy credits if that's a direction that we end up wanting to pursue. And so I think what you're saying, Commissioner Smith, is that we ought to make sure that we don't lose out on opportunities to sell, to trade those renewables in 2020.
So I just want to make sure we're not having a discussion that's not noticed. I think the takeaway is, let's bring this up in a future UAC meeting and discuss it properly. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn? am I missing anything?
I don't think so.
All right, so we will meet again next month at the resiliency workshop?
So are we doing that? Because I heard we're not. So are we doing it?
No, we're still on.
We're still on.
So, but it's on November the 13th.
Okay, so November 13th, we're on.
Right.
Okay.
It's going to be at Mitchell Park.
What time?
We're going to do it right at 7 o'clock. We're just going to
Okay,
take
oh,
this
it's just
meeting
so
time.
we're just taking it to Mitchell
Just
Park.
right.
All right, I'm listening for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, good.